Chapter 7:14. Otsuka held the spear with both hands. The tip of the spear was extremely long, about 30 centimeters long. There were blades protruding from the left and right sides of the spear in the shape of a cross, so this spear was also called a cross spear. The spear was about 2.4 meters long, and the tip of the spear was so sharp that it seemed to pierce through the air. In particular, the body of the spear was covered with exquisite talisman patterns, which were obviously imprinted with some kind of powerful magic circle. Otsuka stared at Li Yundong and said stiffly, "Jinrenli, my spear was once used by Sanada Yukimura as a personal weapon. It has killed countless people and drunk their blood. Today you will be one of the souls killed by this spear." Li Yundong had been seriously injured before and had lost too much blood. His face looked as pale as paper and his feet were weak. Only his eyes were still bright, but they had lost a lot of spirit. He smiled slightly and said, "It turns out to be Sanada Yukimura's personal weapon. You have to be careful not to end up like him." While the two of them were talking on the field, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao asked in a low voice, "Who is Sanada Yukimura?" Zhang Lufang had explained a lot of things to them before, so she didn't mind explaining it again. She said in a low voice, "Sanada Yukimura was a famous samurai in the late Warring States period of Japan. He once fought his way into Tokugawa Ieyasu's formation with a cross spear in his hand during the Battle of Osaka. He fought so hard that Tokugawa Ieyasu almost committed suicide. Although Sanada Yukimura died in the battle due to his lack of physical strength, Tokugawa Ieyasu had to praise him as the strongest soldier in Japan after he narrowly escaped death." Deng Yu looked at Otsuka's spear curiously and then looked at Li Yundong worriedly. "The weapon of the strongest soldier in Japan must be very powerful, right?" Zhang Lufang said nervously in a low voice, "I don't know, but if Li Yundong hadn't been injured, I believe that such a person wouldn't be in his eyes at all, but now." As she said this, she looked at Li Yundong worriedly and couldn't bear to say the rest of her words. At this time, Otsuka held a long spear in his hand and shouted loudly. He quickly rushed toward Li Yundong. His body was extremely low, and the tip of the spear was pointing down at Li Yundong's lower abdomen. He rushed over with a fierce gust of wind. Everyone saw that the steel spear in Otsuka's hand was emitting bursts of light, and the spear seemed to have turned into a fierce dragon. It was aggressive and powerful. It was the secret skill of the cross spear of the treasury yard. This move was fierce and could instantly kill birds in the sky. In his eyes, the spear of Otsuka was so fierce that it could kill a bird. In his view, Otsuka of the spear. However, after he stabbed the spear at Li Yundong's lower abdomen, he saw that Li Yundong was still covering his chest with one hand, and the fingers of the other hand were spread out. His fingers accurately leaned against the side of the tip of the spear, and then with a gentle flick, the fierce spear, which was like a tornado, was pushed away. The founder of the treasury yard was Inrong, the head of the treasury of the Shingfu Temple of the Dharma characteristic sect in Japan. Inrong loved martial arts and was recognized as one of the 2 martial monks with the highest level of martial arts in Japanese history. His cultivation had reached the peak of Dharma seal. The founder of the treasury yard was Inrong, the head of the treasury yard of the Shingfu Temple of the Dharma characteristic sect in Japan. Inrong loved martial arts and was recognized as one of the 2 martial monks with the highest level of martial arts in Japanese history. His cultivation had reached the peak of the Dharma seal realm. He had once created the cross spear by observing the bright moon in the pond. The most famous part of this spear technique was its incantation: stab into a spear, slash into a razor, and cut into a hook and sickle. Ordinary people would usually be able to defend against the first thrust of the spear, but after that, the spear wielder would only need to drag the spear back slightly, and the cross-shaped body of the spear would be able to easily cut the opponent. Moreover, this move of turning the wrist and retracting the spear was extremely fast, like a flash of lightning, and even ghosts and gods would be able to guard against it. But no matter how fast the wrist and the spear were, it could not be faster than the speed of a finger. Li Yundong didn't even look at it. It was as if there were eyes all over his body. He accurately flicked his finger under the spear, and with a clang, the spear was once again deflected. Big Mound was shocked again. In a rage, he stabbed the spear in his hand and attacked Li Yundong from all directions like a storm. Everyone saw that his spear was as fast as lightning. It stabbed, hooked, curled, cut, lifted, cut, chopped, and slashed. Every move was fierce and sharp, and the spear was almost like a shadow. But Li Yundong still stood in the same place. One hand was covering the wound on his chest, and the other hand was gently raised in front of him. He didn't even raise his arm. He just kept moving his 5 fingers. Looking from afar, everyone felt that Li Yundong's movements did not seem to be fast, but he was able to easily deflect the opponent's attack with each move. Sometimes, it even seemed as if De Jong had stretched out the least lethal part of the spear to Li Yundong's fingers for him to flick. Big Mound was shocked and angry at the same time. He couldn't help but let out a roar, and the spear in his hand danced wildly. His whole body and the spear became a black shadow. The air was filled with the sound of his spear tearing through the air. It was shocking, like a ghost dancing in the air. However, Li Yundong remained motionless. One of his hands was placed in front of his chest, and his 5 fingers were impenetrable. No matter how fierce De Mound's attacks were, he was like a small boat floating in the raging waves, never capsizing. The onlookers were dazzled and their mouths were wide open. They couldn't believe that this man who was standing tall was actually seriously injured. At this time, Li Yundong was anxious when he saw that Big Mound's attacks were not successful. Although his attacks were getting fiercer and fiercer, his strength was also getting harder and harder. He aimed at the moment when Big Mound's spear was about to stab him. He suddenly flicked the spear with his finger. With a clang, the spear shook violently. Big Mound felt a huge force coming at him, and the spear almost fell out of his hand. Shocked, he immediately tightened his grip on the spear and the force bounced back. But at this moment, Li Yundong flicked the tip of the spear again. The two opposing forces collided, and with a clang, the tip of the spear broke into 2 pieces. Big Mound's expression changed and he was stunned. However, at this moment, his hand was empty, and the cross-shaped spear was easily caught by Li Yundong. Li Yundong held the spear with one hand, and looked at the broken spear with a smile. He said softly, "Although the spear is good, it reeks of blood. It's not auspicious. I think it's better not to leave such an inauspicious thing in this world." As he spoke, he exerted a little force with his 2 fingers and slowly broke the body of the spear like cutting a branch. Finally, he folded the spear into a bare iron rod and threw it toward Big Mound. Big Mound subconsciously caught the spear. He looked at the bare iron rod in his hand in a daze, unable to speak for a long time. After a long time, he screamed, bent the iron rod with both hands and threw it into the distance. His face was blue and red as he ran out of the arena. The cultivators on the sidelines were all silent for a moment. Everyone looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in their eyes. They couldn't imagine how a cultivator who had been seriously injured could still have such power. At this time, most of the Japanese cultivators had been shocked by Li Yundong. Even those who wanted to fight couldn't help but start to retreat. Of course, as Big Mound had said, this battle could be called a national war, and they couldn't afford to lose. But at this time, they had risked the world's condemnation to challenge a seriously injured opponent. If they won, it would be fine. But if they lost, they would really be unable to raise their heads for the rest of their lives. After Big Mound was defeated, he couldn't restrain his shame and left in a hurry. For a moment, the cultivators of all the sects in Japan felt sorry for each other. They looked at each other and didn't want to fight again. Seeing this scene, Isi Xinguang couldn't help but let out a long sigh and said with emotion, "He's really a god. To have such a person as an opponent is both a great fortune and a great misfortune for our generation." Isi Izumo's eyes were filled with amazement. She had never seen a man as brave as Li Yundong. She said in a low voice, "It's a pity that I can't have a fair fight with him. This will be my lifelong regret." Isi Xinguang reacted keenly. He looked at Isi Chuyun in surprise and asked, "Are you going to fight?" Isi Chuyun nodded slowly. She stared at Li Yundong and said in a low voice, "We can't let such an opponent live in this world. He's too terrible." Isi Xinguang nodded gently and said, "Even a lion needs to go all out to fight a rabbit. Chuyun, go and end all this." Isi Chuyun nodded slightly. She gently moved her feet and slowly walked into the field. She said softly, "I'm Isi Chuyun from the Isi Shinto. I want to see Li Jun's kung fu." As soon as she finished speaking, Zhou Qin suddenly shouted angrily, "You guys are so shameless. Even if you win in this way, what's there to show off? What's there to be proud of? It's glorious." At this time, the Chinese cultivators also shouted loudly, "That's right. There are so many of you. If you fight one by one, how long will it take? If you have the ability, come and fight with me. Why are you always staring at Jinren? Isi Chuyun glanced at the side of the field. Her expression was cold, but her eyes were extremely bright and sharp. She said in a clear voice, "Li Jun, I promise you that I will be the last challenger. If you defeat me, we will immediately turn around and leave. In the future, as long as you are in China, we will never set foot in China again. What do you think?" At this time, Li Yundong's chest was injured, and he could barely muster any strength in his body. Earlier, he had used his 5 fingers to defend against De Maun's repeated attacks, and he had relied on his kung fu to overcome De Maun's strength with ease. However, when he had snatched the spear, his movements had been a little too forceful, and it had immediately caused a sharp pain in his chest. His throat felt salty as if he was about to vomit blood. Li Yundong swallowed the blood back, but his throat was so dry that he couldn't speak for a while. He looked at Ai Chuyun in front of him, and a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. This Ai Chuyun is probably the strongest cultivator in this group of people. She actually appeared at this time and used such words to provoke me, making it impossible for me to avoid. It seems that I'm going to die this time. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, he heard the magnetic voice of a middle-aged man coming from afar. Li Yundong, these Japanese Ayase Shinto goddesses seem to be powerful, but in fact they are strong in appearance and weak in reality. They are easy to deal with. Don't be afraid of her. This was the second time Li Yunyang had heard this voice. He turned his head in surprise and looked around, but he didn't find anything unusual. He was surprised and doubtful in his heart. Who is the person who sent me the voice transmission? Chapter 7:15. This mysterious voice was not only very magnetic, but also very soft and pleasant to listen to. It was full of intellectual gentleness, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Li Yundong suddenly heard the mysterious voice transmission and couldn't help looking around. But as soon as he glanced around, the middle-aged man's voice rang in his ears again. Although the witches of the Shintoism are powerful, they cultivate their nature, not their fate. Moreover, they are born with 5 leakage bodies and never repair them, let alone Juji phase. Therefore, although the Shikigami she summons and the powerful magical weapons she uses are powerful, once they fight, they can attack her body fiercely. They use such powerful magic with their 5 leakage bodies, and they are the biggest flaw. Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart. It's difficult for me to take a step now, let alone attack fiercely. I'm afraid that if I use my strength now, I will immediately bleed to death. But the person who had sent the voice transmission seemed to know what he was thinking and said, point at the Zigong, Yutong, Shanzhong and Huagai acupoints on your chest, and then point at the Ruzhong, Rugen, Chihu, Kufang, Chimen and Ryu acupoints. Then store qi in your lower dantian. When you circulate it, control the qi and blood of your whole body and don't go to the Ren and Du meridians. In this way you can ensure that when you attack your opponent fiercely later, you won't bleed for about a minute. Li Yundong was shocked. He knew that the acupoint control method that the other party had told him was very strange. Even someone like him who had read a lot of books had never seen it. He hesitated for a moment, but then he heard the voice say with a smile, "Why don't you believe me?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart. It's so inconvenient to not know how to use voice transmission. Only others can talk to me privately, but I can't take the initiative to talk to others. Wait. Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Voice transmission? I remember Ziyuan once said that voice transmission seems to be the unique secret skill of the Lingong sect. This person. Could it be Wang Yuanshan? As soon as this thought flashed through Li Yundong's mind, he was immediately shocked. Wang Yuanshan is not dead? Ziyuan. Does she know? Just as Li Yunyang was about to look at Ziyuan subconsciously, he saw that Ayase Chuyun, who was not far away, had taken out a white flag from her wide sleeve. She waved the white flag softly and muttered something in a low voice, as if she was chanting something. Her feet were light and strange, as if she was carrying out some mysterious sacrificial activity. He calmed himself down and temporarily put his worries aside. His fingers quickly pressed several acupoints on his chest according to the instructions given to him by the mysterious man. As soon as he pressed on the wound, he immediately felt a numbness in his chest. He couldn't feel any pain from the wound at all. Most importantly, when he circulated his qi a little, he felt as if all the qi in his body had bypassed the area around the wound, forming a vacuum zone where qi and blood didn't circulate. Li Yundong knew that once a Jinshin master's chest or waist was broken by the opponent, it meant that his Jinshin was broken. Not only would he no longer have a strong Jinshin protection, but it would also be extremely difficult for him to circulate his qi and blood normally. The reason why the Jinshin was so strong was that cultivators could constantly compress their aura in their bodies through their leakless body. The stronger a cultivator's body was, the stronger his cauldron would be. The greater the pressure in the sealed cauldron, the stronger the power of the Jinshin would be and the more condensed it would be. However, once a cultivator's body was injured, it meant that the cultivator was no longer a leakless body. Once they tried to compress and condense this Jinchi, it would automatically leak out from the wound. Therefore the power of Jinshin could not condense and take shape. But at this time, after Li Yundong pressed these acupoints on his chest, it was as if an isolation zone had been created near his wound. His qi and blood didn't pass through this place. Li Yundong was surprised, and he could clearly feel that his jinqi and strength were slowly recovering in his body. As for Ise Chuyun, she was still waving the white flag in her hand and didn't notice the change in Li Yundong at all. After she gracefully danced for a while, she suddenly raised the white banner in her hand into the air and shouted a few times. Immediately after, the sky seemed to split open, and a dazzling seven-colored divine light suddenly fell from it. This light shone straight on Ise Chuyun's body. Suddenly, her clothes fluttered without any wind, and her long black hair, which was like a waterfall, flew up. Her eyes shot out two sharp rays of light that were as dazzling as light, and there was no longer any color in her originally dark pupils. When the cultivators of the various sects of the Japanese Shintoism saw Ise Chuyun's majestic aura, they all looked in awe. Some of them even knelt down to worship Ise Chuyun. Deng Yu, who was standing to one side, felt strange and asked in a low voice, "What are they worshipping? Is this Japanese girl very powerful?" Zhang Kongyun said in a deep voice with a serious face, "They're not worshipping this girl, but Amaterasu, the highest god of the Japanese Shintoism." While they were talking, they saw a beautiful woman with a yellow belt on her forehead slowly descending from the sky. She was wearing a long yellow robe and a blue belt around her waist, holding a golden long sword in her hand. The woman's body was shining like the sun, and she stood high behind Ise Chuyun. At this time Ise Chuyun's face was no longer as cold and elegant as before. At this time, the blue veins on her temples were bulging, and her neck seemed to be crawling with small cyan snakes. The qi and blood in her body were boiling to the extreme. She pointed at Li Yundong and shouted, "The sun rises in the east and the divine light shines." Ise Chuyun's voice was like the shouts of millions of believers at the same time, echoing in the valley of Mount Longhu. Amaterasu, who was standing behind Ise Chuyun, was even more dazzling. The people outside the field were hurt by the dazzling light, and those who were slightly weaker even shed tears and didn't dare to look anymore. Li Yunyang had once fought with Yu Sheng, who had strong eyesight, and had seen his eyes as dazzling as the sun. However, Yu Sheng's ability was far inferior to Ise Chuyun's. With Yu Sheng's strength, an ordinary person could be scared to death by his glare. At this time Ise Chuyun was 100 times more powerful than him. Li Yundong's eyes narrowed into a line in an instant. Even with his cultivation, he didn't dare to look directly at this dazzling light. He knew that Amaterasu was the sun goddess of the Japanese Shintoism. Her godhood was extremely high and her magic was extremely powerful. Moreover, Amaterasu was standing behind Ise Chuyun. If he suddenly attacked at this time, he was afraid that Amaterasu would split him in two with one sword, let alone attack Ise Chuyun's body. Li Yundong thought to himself, "I have to lure Amaterasu away as soon as possible. Otherwise I will never be able to get close to Ise Chuyun. If I can't even get close, how can I attack?" Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and his mind raced. He quickly retreated as if he was going to escape. Ise Chuyun raised her head and laughed. At this time she was already a demigod, and her personality had changed greatly. She pointed at Li Yundong from afar and shouted sternly, "The sun is shining at the ends of the earth. Where can you run to?" As soon as she finished speaking, Amaterasu behind her disappeared in an instant and slashed at Li Yundong with her sword. As soon as Amaterasu's sword fell, there was a terrible sound in the air, as if a piece of cloth had been torn apart. The air in front of Li Yundong was severely distorted, and an invisible black hole seemed to have been cut open by this sword. If he was slightly touched by it, he would immediately be sucked into it. Li Yundong's hair stood on end. At this time he retreated rapidly, but it was no longer a pretense. He ran as far as he could like a bolt of lightning. Amaterasu's sword missed and she was immediately furious. She raised her hand and slashed again. This sword with a loud bang shook the mountains, cracked the earth and cracked the rocks. Its power was extremely terrifying. Everyone saw that Li Yundong was being beaten back step by step, and there was no room for him to fight back at all. Ise Chuyun's strength showed an astonishing overwhelming advantage on the field. Su Chan, who was on the sidelines, didn't dare to watch anymore. She put her palms together, closed her eyes, and began to recite the Buddhist scriptures in a low voice. The poor little girl's voice trembled. At this time she had completely forgotten the scriptures she had memorized. She just kept chanting the words, Amitban, in a low voice. Zhou Qin was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. She wished she could rush up and replace Li Yundong. Ziyuan, on the other hand, stared at the field. Although there was no expression on her face, her mind was quickly thinking about the countermeasures in front of her, trying to think of a way to solve this dilemma for Li Yundong. But even though she was usually resourceful, her mind was empty at this time and she had no idea at all. When the cultivators of the Japanese sect saw that Ise Chuyun was suppressing Li Yundong and beating him up, they didn't look happy at all. It was as if they had already expected this scene. In their opinion, Ise Chuyun was a rare genius in the Japanese cultivation world. If she couldn't win against a seriously injured Li Yundong with all her might, then the sun would rise from the west. The Japanese cultivation world was very quiet, and the Chinese cultivation world was even more mournful. At this time, everyone could see that there was no chance for Li Yunyang to make a comeback in this battle. Se Chuyun's advantage was too great, and he didn't have the slightest intention of underestimating his opponent. There was no chance at all. But just as the Chinese cultivators looked up to the sky and sighed, Li Yundong had unknowingly led Amaterasu to the side of the field, far away from Ise Chuyun. Just as Amaterasu's sword slashed down again, Li Yundong's jinchi suddenly poured out like a flood. This heat flowed through his limbs in an instant, and the power ran through his whole body. His head and tail trembled violently. Li Yundong stamped his feet and rushed toward Ise Chuyun like a cannonball. At this moment, Li Yundong's qi and blood suddenly surged and condensed into a ball. The power of his jinshin burst out, and he instantly got rid of Amaterasu in front of him. In the blink of an eye, he had rushed to Ise Chuyun's face. He turned his hand and slapped Ise Chuyun's face with his palm. This time, everyone was dumbfounded and everyone cried out in surprise. Ise Chuyun hadn't expected Li Yundong to have such amazing strength. She felt as if she had seen a dead corpse suddenly come back to life, and her face changed dramatically. She quickly took out 3 talismans from her sleeve and threw them at Li Yundong. As soon as the 3 talismans left her hand, they immediately turned into 3 fierce shikigami and rushed toward Li Yundong. Li Yundong quickly made 3 Mahamudra with both hands. It was the Vairocana Dharma boundary print, the lotus palm print, and the void hiding print. He shouted sternly, "Break! Break! Break!" The 3 Mahamudra slammed into the 3 shikigami. Suddenly, there were 3 loud bangs that shook heaven and earth, and the 3 shikigami were instantly smashed into pieces. At this time, Li Yundong had almost used all his strength. He knew that his life or death depended on this blow. He didn't stop. He rushed to Ise Chuyun like a meteor and slapped her on the top of her head. Although Ise Chuyun was powerful, she cultivated nature instead of life. Her physical combat ability was almost zero, and her spiritual power was limited because she was a 5-leak body. She couldn't form a strong jinchi like jinshin to protect her body. Therefore at this time she watched Li Yundong pounce on her with her mouth agape. There was no way for her to resist at all. She could only watch Li Yundong's palm get closer and closer to the top of her head, covering the sky and earth. Just as Li Yundong's palm was about to fall, Amaterasu instantly rushed behind Li Yundong and slashed at his back with his sword. At this moment, everyone on the sidelines almost suffocated. They all thought at the same time, is Li Yundong going to die together with Ise Chuyun in this desperate fight? Chapter 7:16. Just as Li Yundong's palm was about to hit Ise Chuyun, both Ise Chuyun himself and the cultivators of the various sects on the sidelines felt that time seemed to have stopped moving at this moment. They all stared at Li Yundong's palm slowly falling down with wide eyes. A few sharp lights suddenly flew out of the 7-treasure bag on Li Yundong's waist. It was the psychic fan of 7 treasures, the Bahuang sword, the Lioha sword, and the burning thumb pot. They jumped up at the same time and rushed toward the long sword in Amaterasu's hand. The pupils in Ise Izumo's eyes narrowed instantly. At that moment, she felt despair as she felt the approach of death and the ferocity of the Grim Reaper. She knew that as long as these treasures could stop the Amaterasu god for even a second, she would be dead. Izumo watched helplessly as Li Yundong's palm covered all the world in front of her and slammed toward her. But just when she thought that she was going to die, she suddenly saw Li Yundong's palm suddenly hovering less than a centimeter above her forehead, and it didn't go down anymore. At this moment, the long sword in Amaterasu's hand collided with the 4 powerful magical weapons. With a clang, the 4 powerful magical weapons were immediately knocked away, and the long sword in Amaterasu's hand was also shaken up. But just as she was about to continue slashing down, her movements suddenly stopped, as if her whole body had been petrified in an instant. Si Chuyun stared at the palm above her head. Her arrogant face slowly became calm, and the amazing light and momentum around her gradually dissipated. The Amaterasu she had summoned also twisted and turned into countless dazzling rays of light that shot in all directions. Isi Chuyun also regained her original cold expression. She said lightly, "Why didn't you slap down?" Li Yundong stared at Isi Chuyun for a long time. Suddenly he smiled and said, "Do you know what the result will be if I slap down?" Izumo glanced at the palm on his forehead and said in an incongruous manner, "Your palm isn't that big either." Although Isi Izumo's words were somewhat irrelevant, he was more or less unwilling to admit defeat, and there was a hint of stubbornness in his words. At this time, Li Yundong only felt that the sealed acupoints in his chest were becoming more and more swollen and stinging. He couldn't help coughing and chuckling, "Although the palm is not big, it's enough to cover the sky." Isi Chumo's body shook slightly. She looked at Li Yunyang with a complicated look in her eyes for a long time before she let out a long breath. She slowly bowed and said respectfully, "I lost." Li Yundong smiled slightly, and the murderous intent in his eyes gradually dissipated. He nodded slowly and heavily. "Remember what you said before." After he finished speaking, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and fell backwards. The mountain-like man finally collapsed. A series of battles that concerned the cultivation world of China and Japan had finally come to an end with Ieyasu Izumi admitting defeat. There was a dead silence among the cultivators of the Japanese cultivation world, but at this time, no one was clamoring to clear the name of the Japanese cultivation world and wash away their shame. The Japanese had one of the biggest characteristics. When they encountered a powerful enemy, they would often feel humiliated and angry, and then rise up to challenge them. They would charge forward without any regard for their own safety, and in the end they would even die together. However, once they found that the strong person they encountered was far beyond their imagination, their humiliation and anger would immediately turn into extreme fear and worship. In 663 AD, the Tang dynasty in Japan had a decisive battle at the mouth of the Baijiang River on the Korean peninsula. At that time, Lu Ringgui, a famous general of the Tang dynasty, led 7,000 Tang troops and more than 170 ships to fight against 40,000 Japanese troops and more than 1,000 warships, and finally wiped out the Japanese navy. After this battle, Emperor Tenji of Japan submitted to Emperor Gaozong of the Tang dynasty. For nearly 1,000 years, Japan had not dared to look directly at China. At this time, the shock that Li Yundong gave to the Japanese cultivation world was no less than that of the battle at the mouth of the Baijiang River more than 1,000 years ago. They could not imagine how such a young cultivator could be so strong and reach such a realm. Li Yundong in front of them had killed Takahashi Shoda, defeated Abe Yuji, defeated Imagawa Kagumo, killed Saionji Tsunekatsu, defeated Otsuka, and finally reversed the situation of Ieyasu Izumi when he was seriously injured and waiting to die. This had simply exceeded their imagination and cognitive ability. At this time, what the cultivators of all sects in Japan felt was no longer humiliation and anger, but deep awe and worship. The Japanese people worshipped the strong, especially the tragic and strong. Although they were from different camps at this time, they were all full of inexplicable respect for the man in front of them who had fought continuously. Izumi was spat out a mouthful of blood by Li Yundong, and her cold face was stained with blood. Surprisingly, she did not frown and reach out to wipe it. She just looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes, and then looked at the few women who were crazily rushing toward him. She sighed softly, turned around and walked to the side of the field. Izumi walked up to Ieyasu Xingguang, bowed slightly and said softly, "I'm sorry to disappoint you." Ieyasu Xingguang put his hands in front of his chest and still looked a little careless, but his expression was full of emotion. He said in a low voice, "I originally thought that the leaders of the major cultivation sects in China would have a fierce confrontation with us. No matter what the result was, it would have been a fierce battle that could be recorded in history. But I didn't expect that the leaders of these Chinese sects would cherish their feathers too much. Among the 3,000 cultivators in China, only this person is a hero. We were originally going to fight against the mystical silver fox, but the battle actually made Li Yundong his invincible reputation. What a pity, respect and fear." He looked at Li Yundong who was lying on the ground in awe and said with emotion, "This person is the reincarnation of Wisdom King, and he is invincible in fighting. He really deserves to be called the Fighting Heavenly Lord. It's an honor for me to be defeated by him." After sighing with emotion, he turned to Ieyasu Xingguang and said, "Xingguang-jun, what should we do now?" Ieyasu Kenko glanced at Ieyasu Izumo helplessly. He seemed to be a little dissatisfied with how confident she was before, but he also knew that he couldn't blame Ieyasu Izumo. At that time, even he thought that Ieyasu Izumo would definitely win. But who knew that Li Yundong was like a ghost or a god? Under such circumstances he could still turn the tide. This made it impossible for him to blame him. Si Xinguang sighed softly and whispered to the depressed cultivators of the various sects, "Everyone, the facts are in front of us. This time we have completely lost." Before he could finish his words, someone straightened his neck, panted heavily and said painfully, "Xinguangjun, are we going back like this?" Si Xinguang sighed and said, "I know what you are thinking, but we didn't lose to these ancient sects in the Chinese cultivation world. We lost to the immovable wisdom king, his reincarnation Li Yundong." As soon as he said this, the cultivators of the other sects suddenly looked much better, but someone said in a low voice, "But, what about the mystical silver fox? Can it be that as long as Li Yundong is here, we will leave the mystical silver fox alone?" Si Xinguang was silent for a long time, and then he said slowly, "Everyone, I believe you all know that the mystical silver fox and the immovable wisdom king are mortal enemies. If the mystical silver fox wants to take revenge, maybe she will choose a target that is easier to take revenge on, such as a seriously injured reincarnated wisdom king. Even if the mystical silver fox doesn't find trouble with the reincarnated wisdom king, we are not necessarily afraid of her. We could seal her up in the past and we can still do it now. As long as she comes again, we will definitely make her unable to return." Si Xinguang's words made the cultivators of all sects turn around in anger, and their faces were full of spirit. They all seemed to have found a way out of the stage and said, "Xinguangjun, well said. That's right, that makes sense. Yes, we lost to the reincarnated wisdom king, not to the Chinese cultivation world. They were in a mess." Suddenly Hideyoshi of the Tiantai sect, who had been reciting scriptures on the sidelines, suddenly opened his eyes and stood up. He scolded sternly, "You timid guys, how dare you succumb to the despotic power of a boy?" His stern shout suddenly made the faces of the others change greatly. Abioli's face darkened and he said angrily, "Hideyoshi, what did you say? Have you ever seen a boy like Li Yundong? Even Imagawa Kagumo doesn't dare to say that he can defeat so many of us in a row." As soon as he said this, the other cultivators echoed loudly. Hideyoshi looked at them angrily. He gritted his teeth and picked up the golden body of Imagawa Kagumo. Finally, he glanced at them gloomily as if he wanted to remember them all in his eyes. He turned around and strode down the mountain. The other monks of the Tiantai sect also followed him down the mountain with their injured companions in their arms. Kaisai Hikaryuni of the Jinyin Tantrism, who had been silent all this time, sighed deeply. He put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha, "Amitba, I've sinned." After that, he slowly turned around and walked down the mountain. The other cultivators of the Jinyin Tantrism left with him one after another. More than half of the cultivators of all sects had left. Compared with the mighty situation when they came, they were really lonely. Si Shenko, Abe Yuri, and the others looked at each other, sighed softly and left one after another. At this time Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others had already surrounded Li Yundong anxiously, especially Su Chan. When she saw Li Yundong fall again, she was shocked and rushed to Li Yundong in the blink of an eye. She saw that there was blood in front of Li Yundong, his eyes were closed, his lips were purple gold, and his expression was very frightening. She suddenly felt a pain in her heart and immediately squatted down to feel Li Yundong's pulse. But when she touched it, she immediately felt that there was no pulse in Li Yundong's body. This time Su Chan was so shocked that she froze on the spot. Her body involuntarily trembled violently. Her lips trembled slightly, and her eyes stared straight at Li Yundong. Her eyes were empty, and her whole body seemed to have left her body. When Ziyuan and Zhou Qin, who had rushed over, saw Su Chan like this, their hearts sank. They hurriedly checked Li Yundong's pulse, and when they did, they were all stunned on the spot, tears streaming down their cheeks. Zhou Qin said in a trembling voice, "Master, don't scare me. I'll kill all these Japanese for you and avenge you." As soon as she moved, Ziyuan grabbed her. Zhou Qin suddenly turned her head and shouted in a hoarse voice, "Ziyuan, let go." Tears kept rolling in Ziyuan's eyes. She smiled bitterly and shook her head. Her expression was stubborn, and she looked at Zhou Qin's sharp eyes without showing any sign of weakness. The two of them confronted each other, but Su Chan was already crying like a pear blossom in the rain. She sobbed and said, "Yundong, you didn't keep your word. You said you wouldn't leave me behind. How could you?" Before she could finish her words, she suddenly heard Li Yundong's soft and helpless voice. "You guys are so noisy." Su Chan's crying stopped abruptly. She took a deep breath and opened her small mouth into an O shape. There were still tears on her face and she stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. Her eyes were filled with unspeakable surprise, ecstasy, doubt and confusion. Zhou Qin also stared at Li Yundong and said tentatively, "Master, you're not dead?" Ziyuan also involuntarily let go of Zhou Qin's hand and looked at Li Yundong with her mouth open and tongue tied. It was really a wonderful scene for a fairy like her to be so surprised. Li Yundong pressed the wound on his chest with one hand and said in a low voice, "Evil disciple, do you really want me to die? So that you can inherit my inheritance in the future?" At this moment, both Zhou Qin and Ziyuan wanted to laugh, but they didn't dare to. Zhou Qin suppressed her surprise and laughter and said embarrassedly, "Master, I thought." Before she could finish her words, Li Yundong sighed and said, "What do you mean? Can't I sleep for a while? You guys are really noisy." As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, Su Chan suddenly cheered and threw herself on Li Yundong. She burst into tears and said, "Yundong, you scared me to death. I thought you were dead." As soon as she threw herself on him, the wound on Li Yundong's chest suddenly ruptured. He felt a sharp pain all over his body and his eyes darkened. The corners of his mouth twitched. He struggled and said, "Stop, stop. Stop it. If you don't stop, I will really die." After saying this, his eyes darkened, his head tilted and he fainted. At this time, there were still some Japanese cultivators who had not left. When they saw this scene they felt very upset in their hearts. The newly born Heavenly Master Battler had not been knocked unconscious in a series of fierce battles, but at this time, Su Chan was so excited that he immediately fainted. It was really that even heroes had a weakness for a beautiful woman. Well, I came back from Beijing today. I was a little in a hurry so I was late. Sorry, there will be another update later. Chapter 717. Su Chan saw that she had pounced on Li Yundong, causing his chest to bleed again. Her eyes rolled back and she fainted. She was shocked and quickly stood up straight. She looked at Li Yundong in a daze, then tentatively poked his arm with her fingers and said in a trembling voice, "Master, master, master, are you okay?" Zhou Qin and Ziyuan also looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape. They really hadn't recovered from the surprise, so extreme joy turned to sorrow. They checked Li Yundong again in a hurry. This time Ziyuan saw through it. She breathed a sigh of relief in her heart and couldn't help but smile. "It's okay." Just now Li Yundong didn't catch his breath and faked his death. But his cultivation is profound, and it only took a while for him to adjust himself. However, just now Su Chan. His wound ruptured, his breath became chaotic and he fainted again. Su Chan was also relieved, but her face was full of embarrassment and sadness. She lowered her head and her chin almost buried in her chest. She whispered, I didn't do it on purpose. I. The more she spoke, the more anxious she became and tears kept welling up in her eyes. Seeing that she was about to cry again, Ziyuan quickly smiled bitterly and said, "Su Chan, it's normal for you to react like this. It's not your fault. With Li Yundong's cultivation, as long as his internal organs and tendons are not hurt, he will be fine. He will be fine after resting for a while." At this time, Zhou Qin was also relieved. She glanced around and saw that the Japanese cultivators were leaving one after another. She raised her eyebrows and snorted coldly. These Japanese still want to leave? It's not that easy. Before she caught up, Ziyuan, who was beside her, hurriedly advised, "Zhou Qin, don't chase a cornered enemy. At this time it's better to avoid trouble." Previously, Isi Chuyun made a vow that as long as he was defeated by Li Yundong, as long as Li Yundong was alive, they would never set foot on the mainland of China again. Don't force them into a corner. Otherwise, a cornered dog will jump over the wall. How could Zhou Qin not know this? She was just angry that these Japanese people had swaggered over to fight with them and then left after failing. Although the Japanese cultivation world had paid a heavy price in the Battle of Mount Longhu, with 2 Jinshin and 1 Thunder Tribulation dead, in Zhou Qin's opinion, even a hair on Li Yundong's body was 100 times more precious than them, not to mention that he had been seriously injured by them and was now unconscious. Zhou Qin glared at the Japanese resentfully and snorted. "They're lucky. I'll settle this score with them sooner or later." At this time, the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect had been messed up by this group of Japanese. The cultivation world of China and Japan had been in a mess, and each sect had suffered casualties. Zhang Ling and the others of the Jingyi school, who had originally wanted to make things difficult for the Linggong sect at the inauguration ceremony, didn't know what to do when they saw the situation. In particular, Zhang Tongtian, Zhang Huashui, and the others of the Qingqing sect had originally wanted to make things difficult for Li Yundong at the inauguration ceremony, but in turn they owed Li Yundong a favor. Although Zhang Huashui's eyes had been hurt by Takahashi Shota's spray before, he had listened in all directions and understood the situation on the field. At this time he gradually calmed down. He turned to Zhang Tongtian and said, "Senior brother, what should we do now?" Zhang Tongtian stared at the unconscious Li Yundong and sighed in a deep voice with a complicated look in his eyes. "Shixiang, there must be something fishy about the night massacre of Qingqing Mountain. I don't think Li Yundong is a person who can do such a cruel thing." Although Zhang Huashui couldn't see Li Yundong's previous fighting methods with his naked eyes, his cultivation quotient and yang spirit were still there. He also knew how fierce and shocking Li Yundong's previous fierce battles were. Therefore, even a proud and hot-tempered man like him couldn't help but admire him. Zhang Huashui nodded. "Shixiang, what you said makes sense. Let's investigate this matter again. However, I always feel that it must have something to do with the Fox Zen school. Maybe in the end, after investigating, I'm afraid it will still fall on this guy." Zhang Tongtian was silent. After a while he said, "Let's not worry about that for now. Although Li Wudi is powerful, our Qingqing sect is not useless. Let's go back." Zhang Huashui hesitated for a moment and asked, "Then, what about the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect?" Zhang Tongtian snorted. "Can you still do it in such a situation? Let's go. This matter must have been ruined now. There's no point in staying any longer." Zhang Huashui had always followed his senior brother's lead. He responded and followed his senior brother to Zhang Ling and the others. They greeted Zhang Ling and the others with their disciples and grand disciples, then went down the mountain noisily. As soon as they left, many people from the Maoshan sect, Chuanjin Dragon sect and other sects also left. Although Du Fei, Wei Qing, Yu Xing, Mao Yuchang and the others wanted to say a few words to Li Yundong, he was unconscious at this time, so it was not appropriate for them to go forward and talk to Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others rashly. They could only look at them from afar and go down the mountain. After Zhang Ling said goodbye to these people one by one, she looked at Zi Yuan helplessly. Her eyes flickered. After a long time she said in a deep voice, "Jinren Zi Yuan?" Hearing her words, Zi Yuan's heart trembled. She straightened up, bowed to her and said, "The Jinren of the earthly fire, what can I do for you?" Zhang Ling said, "Today's inauguration ceremony was supposed to punish you according to the rules of our Jingyi school, but so many things have happened, so the ceremony has been cancelled halfway. Although the ceremony was cancelled today, it doesn't mean that it will be abandoned forever. Our Jingyi school will choose another day to hold the inauguration ceremony. I hope that you won't be unable to take out the powerful magical weapon of the sect at that time." After that, she looked away from Zi Yuan and cast her eyes on Li Yundong. She took a deep look at the man and then at Ao Wushuang with hatred. Finally, she turned her face with a complicated expression and whispered to Zhou Ping, "Let's go." Zhou Ping was stunned. "But master..." Zhang Ling tilted her head slightly and said unhappily, "Didn't you hear what I said?" Zhou Ping's heart tightened. She didn't dare to say anything more. She lowered her head and followed Zhang Ling away. As soon as Zhang Ling left, the people of the Jingyi school also left one after another. For a moment, the mountain was empty. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked back at Li Yundong with every step they took. They wanted to go forward and say a few words to Li Yundong. They didn't want to say too many words. They just wanted this man to know that they were not dead and that they were living a good life in Mount Longhu. But at this time, Li Yundong was unconscious. They wanted to go forward and care about him, but he was surrounded by Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin, and Ao Wushuang was standing next to him. The two of them were shy girls, so how could they have the nerve to get close to these stunning beauties? Some of them were Li Yundong's girlfriends, some were his confidants, and some were his disciples. Even the most distant ones were Li Yundong's fellow disciples or friends. But what about them? At this moment, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao's thoughts were tangled. What am I? Am I just a poor little girl who looks at the hero in my heart from afar and has a crush on him? The sisters had the same thought. They sighed together, turned around and left with Zhang Ling and the others. When Zhang Lufang saw them turn around and leave, she said something to Zhang Kongyun and quickly chased after them. But after taking a few steps, she suddenly found that there seemed to be someone missing from her side. She looked back and saw Hardadef standing there in a daze, motionless like a clay puppet. She quickly ran back to look at Hardadef and asked curiously, "Hardadef, what's wrong with you? Why are you in a daze here?" Hardadef pursed his lips tightly, clenched his fists and trembled slightly. He turned his face and a strange light shone in his blue eyes. He said in a low voice, "I want to cultivate." Zhang Lufang was stunned. "What?" Hardadef then repeated in a firm voice, "I said, I want to cultivate." Zhang Lufang giggled. "What's the matter? Have you been touched by Invincible Li's prestige? Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how far you can go. However, if you want to cultivate, you have to go to my master. What's the use of telling me?" Without saying a word, Hardadef rushed to Zhang Kongyun, knelt down with a thud, kowtowed heavily, and said resolutely, "Master, I want to cultivate." As he spoke, he raised his head and his eyes were warm and firm. There was no sign of his usual naivety. Zhang Kongyun was silent for a while. He raised his hand, helped him up, and patted him on the shoulder. He didn't say a word, but his eyes softened a lot. He turned around and waved his hand, motioning for him to follow behind him. Seeing him leave, Hardadef thought that he wouldn't agree, so he hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed again. However, Zhang Lufang gently kicked him and whispered, "Idiot, master promised you. Hurry up and keep up." As if waking up from a dream, Hardadef hurriedly followed. Just as Zhang Kongyun was about to leave the temple with Hardadef and Zhang Lufang, he suddenly heard Ao Wushuang shouting behind him, "Zhang Kongyun, tell me Wang Yuanshan. Is he still alive?" Zhang Kongyun stopped and said without looking back, "He died a long time ago." After that, he quickly walked away and gradually disappeared into the mountain path. Zhang Kongyun was silent all the way. After leaving the side peak with Zhang Lufang and the others, he suddenly turned to Zhang Lufang and said, "Take him back first. I'll go somewhere else." Zhang Lufang knew that her master had lost the battle today, so he must be in a bad mood. She nodded obediently and said with concern, "Master, come back soon." A smile appeared on Zhang Kongyun's old face and he nodded gently. After watching Zhang Kongyun and Hardadef leave, he walked to a side peak. After he walked up the mountain, he came to a huge rock on the top of the mountain with a Fengqian stone engraved on it. He stood quietly for a long time before he slowly said, "You taught Li Jiandong how to stop bleeding, didn't you? Only you know this kind of technique. Since you were locked up here 10 years ago, no one in the cultivation world has used this technique." As he spoke, a man suddenly appeared behind him. This man was wearing a Taoist robe. He was handsome and elegant like an immortal. At first glance, he looked like a man in his 30s, especially his eyes, which were deep and experienced, as if he had seen through everything in the world. He smiled gently and said, "So what if I did? So what if I didn't?" Zhang Kongyun was silent for a while, then said, "Your old lover is here. Don't you want to go down the mountain to see her?" The man lowered his eyes slightly. After a long time, he raised them and sighed softly. "It's better not to see her." Zhang Kongyun turned his head to look at him and chuckled. "It's been 10 years but you still haven't forgotten her. You still hate us. Are you happy to see me suffer a crushing defeat this time?" The man said in a low voice, "A great disaster is coming. How can I have the time to watch you make a fool of yourself?" Zhang Kongyun seemed to know what the great disaster he was talking about was. He suddenly asked, "Why didn't you take action? If you had taken action, the Jingyi school would not have suffered such humiliation." The man smiled slightly and said, "Whether it's the Jingyi school or the Zhenger school, what does it have to do with me? However, your leader, Jinren Zhang, was able to resist coming out of seclusion. I really admire him. He is indeed a good cultivator who is indifferent to fame and fortune." Zhang Kongyun stared at him closely. After a long time he said, "The cultivation world is about to be in chaos. I want to see how long you can be free and unfettered." With that he snorted and left in a huff. The man's eyes revealed a hint of a smile as he looked at the man's back. He suddenly raised his voice and said, "You are the ones who locked me up here and now you are saying such things. Could it be that you want to take all the good and bad people in this world as your own?" Zhang Kongyun stopped and glared at him angrily. Then he quickened his pace and left quickly. The man looked at his figure and couldn't help laughing. But after laughing for a while, he suddenly looked in the direction of Ao Wushuang and said softly, "Wushuang, I haven't seen you for 10 years. How are you?" Chapter 7:18. The earth-shattering battle finally came to an end. There were few people on the mountain which had been crowded with people. Except for Lu Chunping who had been in a daze by the side of the Taoist sanctum, there were only Li Jiandong, Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, Ao Wushuang and the others left. Ao Wushuang looked in the direction where Zhang Kongyun had left. After a long time, Su Chan walked gently to her side and said in a low voice, "Master, let's go back." Ao Wushuang turned her head. Her cold and strong face was full of heartbreaking sadness and unwillingness. She whispered, "Chan'er, do you think Wang Yuanshan is dead?" Su Chan had never seen her strong and resolute master show such a weak side. She couldn't bear it and gently persuaded, "Master, I think Wang Yuanshan should still be alive." Although Ao Wushuang knew that Su Chan was comforting her, her eyes still lit up and she quickly asked, "If he is alive, why didn't he come to me?" Su Chan blinked and said, "Maybe he has his own difficulties?" Ao Wushuang grabbed her arm and said anxiously, "What difficulties does he have? Is there anything more important than me?" Su Chan felt a pain in her arm. She couldn't help but cry out, "Master, it hurts." Only then did Ao Wushuang wake up. She let go of her hand in disappointment and despair. She smiled sadly and said softly, "I know you are comforting me. After so many years, he has never come to find me. If he is still here, he will definitely come to find me. If he doesn't come, then there can only be one result. I should have expected it. I should have stopped holding out hope." As she said this, 2 lines of tears slowly flowed down Ao Wushuang's cheeks. Not far away, Ziyuan and Zhou Qin looked at each other and were silent. In their impression, Ao Wushuang was a strong, indifferent, gorgeous and strong woman. But under her hard shell, there was a hot and weak heart. At this moment she was no different from a weak and helpless little girl. Su Chan gently wiped away Ao Wushuang's tears. She chuckled and said, "Master, even if Wang Yuanshan has ascended, maybe one day you will also become an immortal. Won't you be able to see him again?" Ao Wushuang stared at Su Chan with a gentle look in her eyes. "Silly child, since the Tang dynasty, no fox spirit has become an immortal. Don't be silly. Even if Ao Wushuang reaches the realm of a 9-tailed celestial fox, she still can't become an immortal." Su Chan asked curiously, "Why not?" Ao Wushuang gently stroked Su Chan's cheek and said softly, "Because the immortals in heaven don't accept us, and the people on earth don't accept us either. We are a group of monsters who don't care about heaven and earth." Su Chan was not convinced. "No, Yundong will take care of me. I don't care whether others take care of me or not." Ao Wushuang chuckled and looked at Su Chan as if she had a lot to say, but when the words were about to come out of her mouth, she glanced at Li Yundong, who was unconscious not far away, and changed her mind. "Forget it, let's go back first. Li Yundong's injury is more important." Su Chan nodded obediently, and the group turned and walked down the mountain. After a fierce battle, the dark clouds that had originally shrouded Mount Longhu disappeared. The blue sky was clear and boundless. Even from a distance, Su Chan and the others could see that there were many tourists on the main peak of Mount Longhu looking at them. They didn't dare to fly. After going down the mountain, they walked a long way before flying back to Tianan City with Li Yundong. As soon as he returned home, the little foxes, who had been waiting anxiously for news, swarmed around him, chattering and asking questions. Especially when they saw Li Yundong, who was unconscious, they suddenly turned pale with fright and surrounded him tightly. Fortunately, Su Chan put her hands on her hips and scolded them, which drove the little foxes away. Chris, who was next to her, also looked at the seriously injured Li Yundong in surprise. She wanted to ask something, but she didn't know how to say it, so she could only watch with concern. After Su Chan, Ziyuan, and the others placed Li Yundong in his room, Ziyuan treated his wounds and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Ziyuan looked at Su Chan and then at Zhou Qin, and then said softly, "Su Chan, take care of Li Yundong. Zhou Qin, you have to be careful that the higher-ups will make trouble for you. This time the impact of the battle is very big and it's very bad. You have to be careful." Zhou Qin nodded. "Don't worry, I've already thought about what to do. It'll be fine." Ziyuan smiled slightly and said softly, "That's good. Li Yundong is really lucky to have a disciple like you." Zhou Qin looked at her with a complicated look in her eyes and said softly, "It's a real blessing for me to have a master like Li Yundong. Moreover, it's his fortune to have a confidant like you." Ziyuan's heart trembled slightly. She couldn't help but quickly glance at Su Chan, only to see that she was looking at the unconscious Li Yundong in a daze, as if she hadn't heard such a sentence. Ziyuan breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. She smiled, didn't answer, and walked out of the door. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong quietly in the room for a while. After a long time, she sighed softly and also went out. Su Chan looked at Li Yundong quietly in the room, her eyes flashing. The little girl felt extremely guilty now. She couldn't help in the battle, but just now she had almost worsened Li Yundong's injury. This was too much. Even the little girl couldn't forgive herself. How could I be so stupid? Su Chan hit her head in annoyance. She looked at Li Yundong with a sad face and pouted her little mouth. She thought dejectedly in her heart, Yundong must hate me. I almost killed him. Su Chan stared at Li Yundong's face with infatuation. Her eyes moved from his thick eyebrows to his tall nose, and then to the corners of his mouth. The girl couldn't help but be fascinated by him for a moment. She stared at his face for a while, then at the corners of his mouth. Since the first day she had decided to be with him, since she had decided to grow up with him, although the little girl had expected that he would become a very great cultivator and a great hero in the future, she had never expected that he would become a great cultivator and a great hero. But she really hadn't thought that Li Yundong could become so strong that he could almost destroy the entire Japanese cultivation world by himself and make the Japanese cultivation world have to abide by the promise that as long as Li Yundong was in China, they would not set foot in China. From now on, Invincible Li would be truly invincible. The cultivators of all sects would no longer have any doubts about Li Yundong's strength. In the future, wherever they went, they would point at Li Yundong from afar and say, "Look, this is Invincible Li." And what about her? In the future, if she stayed by his side, they would point at her and say, "Look, that's the troublemaker around Li Yundong, just like they look at my master. Wang Yuanshan and my master were forced to separate, so what about me? Will I be forced to separate from Li Yundong in the future? If I don't become stronger, will the tragedy that happened to my master and Wang Yuanshan repeat itself?" When she had seen Li Yundong fall twice on Mount Longhu, Su Chan had really felt a wave of fear and oppression from the depths of her soul. She couldn't imagine how she would survive without Li Yundong by her side in the future. "No, I can't let what happened to my master happen to me." Su Chan clenched her fists and her eyes showed a strong and firm look. She whispered, "You have to become stronger, Su Chan. You can't be a burden to Yundong." As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a soft voice say, "Silly girl, do you finally want to work hard to become stronger?" Su Chan was shocked. She looked up and saw Li Yundong standing on the bed looking at her gently. The little girl was surprised and said, "Yundong, you're awake? How's your injury?" The little girl looked at Li Yundong's chest, only to see that it was intact as if there was no injury. She was tongue-tied and said, Your injury has healed? That's impossible, isn't it?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He pointed down and said, "Look down." The little girl looked down and saw that Li Yundong was still lying on the bed, his chest wrapped in gauze that was soaked with red blood. Su Chan was stunned. "Ah, to Yundong's?" But then she quickly reacted and said, "Oh, your yang spirit is out of your body." Li Yundong laughed and sat on the edge of the bed. He reached out and touched the tip of the little girl's nose. "You're not stupid." Su Chan pouted and lowered her head. She took Li Yundong's hand and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, I'm so stupid. I couldn't help you and I almost made your injury worse." Li Yundong looked at Su Chan lovingly and laughed. "Silly girl, you're just a little excited. Besides, people will grow up slowly, but you are very slow." At first, Su Chan was a little relieved, but when she heard the last sentence, her face suddenly fell. She said bitterly, "Well, I know I'm stupid. Don't hit me all the time or I'll really become stupid." Li Yundong saw that the little girl was full of self-pity and self-blame, so he laughed and said, "I'm just teasing you. You're the type of person who matures slowly, okay?" Su Chan wrinkled her little nose and made a face at Li Yundong. "You're so annoying. I don't want to be the type of person who matures slowly." Li Yundong looked at Su Chan with a smile and suddenly whispered to her, "Do you want to become a master immediately?" Su Chan nodded without hesitation. "Of course I can't help you with anything. I'm very sad." Li Yundong laughed wickedly, hugged Su Chan, and said with a smile, "Well, you also know that I'm a Jinshin master now. Do you remember what you said?" Su Chan looked up at Li Yundong and blinked. At first she didn't react, but soon she cried out. Her face was red, and she shyly buried her head in Li Yundong's chest and said angrily, "You're so annoying. You only remember this. You're so bad." Li Yundong said with a straight face, "The way of dual cultivation is a family, and the ceremony of husband and wife is a big ceremony. Haven't you heard of it?" Su Chan smiled and said, "Bah, what big ceremony? Is doing this kind of thing also a big ceremony?" Li Yundong said seriously, "You little girl, did all the books you studied before go to waste? Don't you know that this kind of thing is called a big ceremony?" Su Chan scratched her cheeks and giggled. "Shame on you. This is obviously a derivative meaning. How can you take it so seriously?" Li Yundong grabbed her wrist and said with a coquettish face, "Channer, don't you want to do this big ceremony with me?" Su Chan's ears were so embarrassed that they almost bled. She chuckled and lowered her head. The corners of her eyes were flowing and she giggled and said, I called you invincible, Li. If I see you like this, won't I laugh myself to death? Li Yundong smiled and said, when I fainted, I thought of you for a moment. I was thinking, if one day I'm gone, what will you do? If I die one day and don't have a day of warmth with my girl, then I will have lived my life in vain. Su Chan was shocked when she heard this. She quickly reached out and pressed her hand against Li Yundong's lips, saying nervously, don't talk nonsense. You can't say such things casually. Li Yundong gently picked up Su Chan's soft hand and kissed it. He said softly, if I hadn't met you, I would have lived a muddle-headed life. But God let me meet you, so I won't let my life be in vain. 10,000 years is too long. I have to seize every moment, right? Su Chan felt warm in her heart when she heard this. She gently stroked Li Yundong's lips and cheeks with her hand. The little girl's face was blushing. She whispered, Yundong Chaner is all yours. She also wants to be with you. It's just that your injury hasn't healed yet. When your injury is healed, we can't. Okay. Li Yundong looked at Su Chan's shy appearance and laughed in his heart. Suddenly, he said in surprise, of course I have to wait until my injury is healed. There's a big hole in my body, so I can't condense the power of Jinshin, so my yang spirit is only in the yang spirit realm. If I have sex with you, won't I be sucked to death by you? As he said this, he shook his head and sighed. I didn't expect you to be even more anxious than me. Su Chan was embarrassed. She stamped her feet and said angrily, you're so annoying. You're messing with me. The two of them laughed for a while. Su Chan lay lazily in Li Yundong's arms. Although her face was full of happy smiles, Li Yundong was keenly aware of a trace of worry and melancholy hidden deep in Su Chan's eyes. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly smiled and said, come with me, your yang spirit. I'll take you somewhere. Su Chan asked curiously, where are we going? Li Yundong smiled slightly. Let's go find Wang Yuanshan. Chapter 719. Su Chan looked at Li Yundong in surprise and said, Yundong, why do you want to find Wang Yuanshan now? Isn't he already dead? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, no, he shouldn't be dead and he should be in Mount Longhu. I'll be there soon. Su Chan's eyes widened. No way? Wang Yuanshan is not dead? How do you know? Li Yundong smiled and said, do you remember that I sealed the acupoints on my body to stop the wound? That was told to me by a voice transmission. Moreover, I remember that Ziyuan once said that only the cultivators of the Lingong sect are good at using voice transmission. Who do you think the person who sent me the voice transmission was? Su Chan exclaimed, I have to tell Master as soon as possible. Li Yundong quickly grabbed her and said, silly, let's go and have a look first. What if I'm wrong? Your master can't bear this kind of disappointment anymore. Su Chan nodded and looked at Li Yundong with admiration. Yundong, you are so thoughtful. Shall we go now? Li Yundong nodded and looked at Li Yundong with admiration. As she spoke, she looked at Li Yundong's body and said softly, now that your yang spirit is out of your body, will it affect the recovery of your injury? Li Yundong laughed and said, no, my qi and blood are running automatically in my body and recovering on their own. Ziyuan poured so many elixirs on my wound before. Do you think it was all for nothing? Li Yundong patted Su Chan's head and said softly, let's go to Mount Longhu to have a look. Su Chan rolled her eyes. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly felt a familiar aura quickly leaving the house and heading into the distance. Su Chan was very familiar with this aura. It was the aura of Ao Wushuang. Su Chan was stunned and then asked curiously, where is Master going? Li Yundong was also stunned for a moment. The direction she's going seems to be Mount Longhu? Su Chan said in surprise, it must be that Master is unwilling to give up, so she wants to go to Mount Longhu to have a look. She won't be in trouble, will she? Li Yunyang thought for a while and said, after the battle, although the Jingyi school did not lose many people, there will definitely be a period of relaxation. The defense should not be very strict. Moreover, with Ao Wushuang's strength, she should be fine. However, we can't be too careless. We'll follow them to take a look, but don't let your physical body follow them. Otherwise, if something happens, it'll be inconvenient for you to escape. Su Chan giggled. You're the world-famous Li Wudi now. Will you be chased away by others? Li Yundong smiled and said, there is no such thing as absolute invincibility. My physical body is very weak now, and the power of my yang spirit has also decreased a lot. Besides, Mount Longhu is not a playground. I can go and leave as I please. If something happens, it will be hard to say. Su Chan nodded and said with a smile, my yang spirit is stronger than yours now. Maybe I'll have to protect you in the end. Li Yundong laughed and said, well, I'm looking forward to it. The two of them chatted and laughed, and the yang spirit quickly chased after Ao Wushuang. The two of them followed Ao Wushuang from afar for a while and saw that she was flying in the direction of Jiangxi. After waiting for a long time, the two of them saw that the mountains under their feet were continuous, with green mountains and blue waters. They were vast and winding, like a crouching dragon. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said with some emotion, I didn't expect to return to Mount Longhu so soon. Let's go down. Su Chan nodded. She looked around and felt that Ao Wushuang had landed on a side peak, so she stopped. She pulled Li Yundong's hand and whispered, Master is over there. Do you want to go and have a look? Li Yundong nodded and landed on the ground with Su Chan. The two of them looked over and saw that on the top of a side peak, Ao Wushuang was standing in front of a huge rock. Her back was to the two of them. Although her expression could not be seen, Li Yundong could tell from the way she gently stroked the rock that her heart must be full of sorrow at this time. Ao Wushuang stroked the rock and muttered to herself in a low voice, Yuan Shan, are you really still alive? If you were still alive, why didn't you come to see me? Do you know how much I've missed you in the past 10 years? Do you have the heart to watch me live alone in the world? At this time Ao Wushuang's voice was bitter and mellow, like a dreamer whispering her thoughts to her lover. In the distance, Li Yundong and Su Chan sighed in their hearts when they heard this. Su Chan's eyes were red and she couldn't help but want to cry. She unconsciously held Li Yundong tightly with both hands, as if she was afraid that he would run away in the next second. The two of them quietly listened to Ao Wushuang whisper to the huge rock about the little things she had done with Wang Yuanshan. They listened to her talk about her previous happiness, as well as the pain and sadness when she was lonely. For a moment the two of them seemed to be in a daze. Soon, Ao Wushuang spoke in a low voice. No one knew how long it had been, but her tears had already formed. Tears rolled down her beautiful face. She cried in a low voice for a long time before she let out a long sigh and said in a choked voice, Yuan Shan, if you are still in this world, you must come to me. You must remember. As she said this, she suddenly raised her head and shouted, Wang Yuanshan, you must come to me. Ao Wushuang's shout shook the sky and echoed between the valleys of Mount Longhu. Li Yundong and Su Chan were so shocked that their faces turned a little pale. They looked at each other and Su Chan stammered, Master, is she crazy? Isn't she afraid of attracting the other people of the Jingyi school? Li Yundong also said with a solemn face, Oh no. Your master, she seems to have the will to die. Su Chan was startled. What do you mean? Li Yundong said in a deep voice, there are two purposes for your master to shout. First, if Wang Yuanshan is still here, he will definitely be able to hear this shout, and the other people of the Jingyi school will also be able to hear it. At this time, the other people of the Jingyi school will definitely come to make trouble for your master. If Wang Yuanshan doesn't show up at this time, your master will definitely think that he is indeed dead. If so, she will die with the others of the Jingyi school. If Wang Yuanshan is not dead, he should show up to save Ao Wushuang. Su Chan was shocked and hurriedly said, Yundong, hurry up and help my master. Li Yundong smiled bitterly. Me? I'm at best a yang spirit master now. I'm not as good as you in fighting. How can I help? Su Chan said anxiously, what should we do? Li Yundong patted her head and said softly, let's wait and see. Wang Yuanshan should show up. But what surprised Li Yundong and Su Chan was that after Ao Wushuang's shout, not only did Wang Yuanshan not show up, but none of the other people of the Jingyi school showed up. What's going on? Li Yundong and Su Chan looked at each other. Li Yundong was tongue-tied. Su Chan also asked curiously, why didn't anyone come? Li Yundong had a strange look on his face. I don't know. But it seems to be a good thing? Su Chan's face was full of joy. Anyway, as long as my master is fine. At this time, the two of them couldn't help looking at Ao Wushuang, only to see that Ao Wushuang's face, which was full of hope, slowly became lonely and sad, and finally lowered her head in despair. Ao Wushuang stood there in a daze, motionless as if she had been petrified. After a long time she slowly moved. Her footsteps were as heavy as lead. She walked down the mountain step by step until her figure disappeared into the jungle. She never looked back. Li Yundong sighed with emotion. Su Chan, who was beside him, seemed to empathize with him. Tears kept welling up in her eyes, and she snuggled up to Li Yundong with tears in her eyes. She whispered, Yundong, I'm so sad. Why didn't Wang Yuanshan show up? Li Yundong sighed softly and said, maybe, he is really not in this world anymore? Su Chan held Li Yundong's arm and pressed her face against his chest. She looked at the direction in which Ao Wushuang had left and said in a low voice, why didn't the people of Jingyi School come? Li Yundong also felt strange in his heart. He turned to look at the main peak of Jingyi School and shook his head. I don't know, but this matter is very strange. Su Chan suddenly looked up and asked, shall we go and see what's going on? Li Yundong thought for a moment and nodded. Okay, let's mix in the crowd of tourists and have a look. Don't cause any trouble. After the two of them came to an agreement, they quickly rushed toward the main peak. However, as they ran, they did not see a single Taoist priest. Especially when they arrived at the front of the Taoist rite on the main peak, they realized that there were only a few Taoist priests of higher seniority who were socializing around the scenic spots. The others were extremely young and of extremely low seniority. Li Yundong glanced around and felt a little strange. But suddenly, a Taoist priest rushed to a senior Taoist priest and whispered something in his ear. The Taoist priest's face changed greatly. He immediately winked at the Taoist priests around him and then walked down the mountain quietly. Li Yundong looked back and winked at Su Chan, and the two of them quickly followed. They saw these Taoist priests go down the mountain and get out of the sight of the secular people. They quickly flew toward a side peak. The two of them followed them from a distance. When they arrived at a side peak, they found that these Taoist priests had gone into a very hidden Taoist rite. Li Yundong and Su Chan looked at each other and didn't dare to follow them in. Instead, they chose to choose a high place and looked at it from a high place. At a glance, they saw that the Taoist rite was very large, even larger than the one held by the Jingyi school for the succession ceremony of the Linggong sect. In the field, a group of Taoist priests in gray Taoist robes were confronting Zhang Ling, Zhang Kongyun, and the others of the Jingyi school. There was a lot of noise on both sides and the atmosphere was tense. Su Chan said curiously, it's so strange. Are they having an internal strife? Li Yundong said curiously, could it be that they are having an internal strife right after the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect? That's impossible. No. Among these Taoist priests, why are there so many foreign devils? The two of them took a closer look and saw that many of the Taoist priests in gray robes had deep eyes, high noses, and golden blue eyes. Su Chan was dumbfounded. Which sect is this? Li Yundong also felt a little incredulous. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard the sound of music coming from the mountain road below, and there were people shouting in unison. But when they got closer, they understood that it was actually someone playing the swona, beating the alms bowl, and some people were shouting in unison, Sect leader Wu Hua, supernatural power is connected to the gods, in the heavens and on the earth, only I am supreme. When Li Yundong heard this, he almost fainted. He looked at the group of people in shock and said, damn it, no way. When did Jing Yuan become the constellation immortal? Did he watch too many demigods and semi-devils? Su Chan heard these people shouting at the top of their lungs. Their voices were loud, but the content was a little funny. She wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. She could only hold back her laughter and said, what the hell is this old guy doing? The two of them widened their eyes as they looked at the group of people, only to see that they were dressed in all sorts of ways. The people at the front were playing and singing while the people at the back were holding banners and shouting loudly. Among them, a few strong men were carrying a wooden platform, on which sat a beautiful and charming woman. Li Yundong was shocked when he saw the woman. He stammered, damn it, this is Ding Nan. What the hell is going on? Did she take the wrong medicine? Chapter 720. Li Yundong and Su Chan were shocked to see Ding Nan slowly going up the mountain surrounded by a group of people. Su Chan was tongue-tied and said, how did Ding Nan become the leader of the Yin and Yang sect of 5 flowers? Li Yundong also had a strange expression on his face. He murmured, could it be that Jing Yuan died after the battle at Tiandu Peak? That can't be. With his strength, he shouldn't have died just like that. Su Chan pointed at Ding Nan with a smile on her face. But, from the looks of it, Ding Nan seems to be the leader now. At this time, the two of them looked carefully and saw Ding Nan sitting on a high wooden platform. The platform was square, well-made, exquisitely carved, and brightly colored. Even from a distance, they could see at a glance that the side of the wooden platform was full of exquisite patterns. The platform was covered with soft silk mattress. Ding Nan was leaning against a goose-down cushion, and her face was covered with light makeup. She looked beautiful and arrogant. Ding Nan looked around condescendingly. Although her eyes were full of pride, there was also a trace of anger hidden deep in them. She looked up at the Taoist temple hidden in the jungle in the distance and shouted to a young man beside her with some displeasure, "Hurry up, hurry up!" The man shouted a few times at the people carrying the high platform, then turned his head. His face was quite handsome, but his eyebrows were full of flattery. He smiled and said, "Leader, this is already the fastest." Ding Nan raised her eyebrows and said angrily, "Be *****, if you hadn't insisted on such a show, how could I have missed the inauguration ceremony of the Lingong sect? By the time I got there, everyone would have left. Now that there are so many people gathered here, how can I miss it again? Don't you want our Yin and Yang sect of Mount Wuhua to stand out? Don't you want to hold our heads up high?" As soon as she finished speaking, the disciples of Mount Wuhua behind her suddenly shouted hysterically, "Leader Wuhua, the spiritual power of the gods, I am the only one in the world." Their voices echoed in the valley, and even Ding Nan's heart was shaken and she was full of joy. The young and handsome man in front of her said with a smile, "Yes, yes. But sect leader, you also need to conserve your energy. Don't waste your energy just because you want to hurry, right?" Ding Nan said angrily, "Bullsh***T. I've been sitting all the way here. How could I have wasted my energy? Besides, are you the one who has the final say or am I?" When the young man heard this, he couldn't help but turn his head to the other side. He kept winking at a slender woman with brown hair and blue eyes, as if asking for help. This woman was none other than Alba. Since the poor foreign girl witnessed Ding Nan killing her teacher, she had been forcibly detained by Ding Nan. Although she had wanted to escape for many days, how could she escape from Ding Nan's grasp? Ding Nan was born to be a scheming and resourceful woman. Especially since she had been with Zhou Qin for a long time, she had seen all kinds of conspiracies in the officialdom and the business world, and her experience had greatly increased. However, when she had been with Zhou Qin in the past, she had always been suppressed by Zhou Qin, and all her light had been obscured by Zhou Qin. Later, although she had left Zhou Qin, she had become more cautious around Zheng Yuan, keeping a low profile and being humble. She was afraid that she would reveal her flaws and arouse Zheng Yuan's suspicion, which would lead to her death. This kind of repression and humiliation had made Ding Nan's heart even more twisted, especially when she had suddenly killed Zheng Yuan and become the leader of the Yin Yang sect in Mount Wuhua. It was like a slave had suddenly become a master, and the poor had suddenly become a nouveau riche. Her mind had become strange and twisted. Although at first there were still some hardcore supporters of Zheng Yuan in the Yin Yang sect in Mount Wuhua who had questioned his death, Ding Nan had used the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade, the threaded hairpin of soul traversing, and the immortal pen to eradicate her opponents. After that, no one in Mount Wuhua dared to make any strange noises. During this process, a young man named Song Guohua stood out. This young man did not have any extraordinary abilities among the 100 or so disciples of Mount Wuhua. However, he was a top-notch expert in bootlicking and flattering. In the past, when Zheng Yuan was still alive, Zheng Yuan did not like this kind of flattery, so he had no chance to stand out and did not teach him much magic cultivation. But now, Ding Nan had become the leader of the Yin Yang sect, and Ding Nan was a woman who was born vain and liked to be pursued by others. At this time, there was no one above her. At this time, this kind of vanity broke out several times or even dozens of times. Song Guohua keenly grasped this and quickly won Ding Nan's trust. After testing him for a period of time, Ding Nan gradually handed over many things around her to him to take care of and concentrated on her cultivation. After a series of failed attempts to escape, Alba gradually gave up and was full of awe for this devil-like master. She did not dare to have the slightest thought of resisting and began to accept her fate to cultivate with Ding Nan. Ding Nan did not know whether it was out of sympathy or for other reasons, but she used the method of slapping Alba and giving her a sweet date to tame this wild woman. After seeing that she was finally honest, Ding Nan slowly taught her some simple cultivation methods. The magic of cultivation was that it could not only make people obtain extraordinary power, but also give cultivators a great sense of satisfaction in the process of qi cultivation. After Alba came into contact with the way of cultivation, she was shocked by the magic and mystery of it. She immediately forgot the previous unhappiness and pain and immersed herself in the world of cultivation like a drug addict. After noticing Alba's thoughts, Ding Nan was also quite satisfied. She gradually relaxed her vigilance and control over Alba. Since the two of them had killed Zheng Yuan together, Ding Nan subconsciously felt closer to Alba than to anyone else. Every time Song Guohua was scolded and beaten by Ding Nan, he would turn to Alba for help. During this period of time, Alba had learned a little Chinese. When she saw Song Guohua looking at her, she said in stiff Chinese, "Master, I don't think you can blame Song for this. He just—" Ding Nan glared at her fiercely and scolded, "You have no right to speak here. Shut up." Alba was frightened by her. She immediately shrank her head and shrugged helplessly at Song Guohua. Song Guohua smiled bitterly and had no choice but to turn his head to urge the disciples of Mount Wuhua who were carrying the wooden platform. For a moment, these strong men were sweating profusely, and their footsteps became a little faster. In the distance, Li Yunyang and Su Chan were shocked when they saw what they were doing. However, no matter how powerful they were, they would never have imagined that this was what Song Guohua had specially prepared to please Ding Nan. In particular, this sentence of leader of Mount Wuhua with supernatural power is the only one in the world. It was really flattery and disgusting to the extreme. At first, Ding Nan was very disgusted and had scolded Song Guohua sternly. However, Song Guohua was keenly aware that Ding Nan only frowned a little when she heard what he said, but she immediately relaxed. He knew that Ding Nan was just not used to it. Therefore, he mustered up his courage and cried out with tears streaming down his face, "Leader Shifu, this is the voice of all the disciples of Mount Wuhua. In the future, our Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua will be carried forward in your hands. This sentence comes from the bottom of our hearts. As the saying goes, flattery will never work." Although this flattery was very disgusting, if the disciples around her flattered her all day long and repeated the lie 10,000 times, it would become the truth. Slowly, Ding Nan started to feel disgusted and then adapted to it. Now, after listening to it a lot, she actually felt very satisfied, as if she had really become an invincible master in the world. Moreover, in her opinion, she had the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade, the immortal pen, the threaded hairpin of soul traversing, and she had once absorbed the immortal qi of the Diuan Jindan. As long as she was willing to work hard, she might be able to become the best in the world in the future. At that time, even Zhou Qin would be trampled under her feet, and even the world-famous Li Wudi would not dare to look down on her. Therefore, with this idea in mind, Ding Nan set off from Mount Wuhua to Mount Longhu with her disciples as if they were on a parade. However, when they slowly arrived at the side peak of Mount Longhu, they found that the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect had already ended. Fortunately, Ding Nan soon keenly sensed the aura of many strong people appearing on a side peak in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat and she headed for this side peak. When she slowly climbed up this side peak and entered the Taoist temple, the Taoist priests of the two sects who had been confronting each other were all dumbfounded. They saw the disciples of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua playing their instruments and singing at the front and shouting slogans at the back. The disciples in the middle were even more exaggerated, each of them dressed up like a mighty god king. Even though there was a beautiful woman sitting at the top with a graceful figure, after a moment of silence, everyone burst into wild laughter at the same time. For a moment, the tense atmosphere on the field was gone. The people from both sides were pointing at Ding Nan and laughing, especially among the group of people in gray Taoist robes. A frivolous young man stepped forward and laughed loudly, "Hey beauty, what are you doing? Are you here to make a movie?" I'm dying of laughter. You call me the leader of Mount Wuhua? Your spiritual energy is divine, and you are the only one in the world. It's so funny. How dare you shout such words in front of us? Aren't you afraid of being humiliated in front of so many people? Ding Nan couldn't stand others looking down on her, especially when she was humiliated in front of so many people. Her heart was full of killing intent, but her face remained calm. She slowly touched her sleeve with one hand and touched the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade. As soon as her fingertips touched this extremely vicious powerful magical weapon, her heart immediately calmed down. A charming smile appeared on her face and she giggled. "Handsome, what's your name? Tell me so that I can get to know you." The handsome man saw Ding Nan's enchanting figure and outstanding appearance, especially her charming smile, which was really very attractive. He smiled proudly and said, "I'm a disciple of the overseas sect of Jingyi School. My name is Sun Qing. You can also call me by my Taoist name, Jinren Yuanfa, or by my English name, Louis." As he said this, he flipped his bangs coquettishly and looked at Ding Nan with a smile. Ding Nan's face was full of smiles, but the eyes in her eyes were getting colder and colder. She whispered Sun Cheng's name, and in an instant, a few ghosts rushed out of the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade hidden in her sleeve. They cried and rushed to Sun Cheng in an instant. Sun Cheng was still proudly posing and showing off. He didn't expect that Ding Nan would use her ultimate skill in the blink of an eye. Trump card. Before he could react, he saw several ferocious-looking undead howl and drill into his body. Then they pulled his soul back at lightning speed. In an instant his own body was sucked dry like a mummy. His whole body was like a wooden stake and his face was still full of disbelief. He was motionless but he was already dead. Ding Nan's move was as fast as lightning. The Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade was originally an extremely sinister and vicious powerful magical weapon. When Zheng Yuan used it, he used it openly, but Ding Nan simply hid it. She even recited the other party's name almost silently. This was extremely hidden and sinister. Even immortals would find it difficult to guard against it, let alone Sun Qing, who was defenseless. For a moment, everyone was dumbfounded. They looked at the beautiful and enchanting leader of Mount Wuhua with their mouths agape, as if they couldn't believe their eyes. Li Yundong and Su Chan were also so shocked that their eyes were about to pop out. Li Yundong stammered, "Is Ding Nan crazy? Isn't she afraid of provoking public anger and being beaten up by the crowd?" But at this time, Song Guohua, who was standing to one side, suddenly came to his senses and was the first to shout, "The leader is beautiful, the leader is mighty." The other disciples of Mount Wuhua also came to their senses and shouted in unison, "The leader is beautiful, the leader is mighty." For a moment, the side peak of Mount Longhu was filled with such passionate slogans. The expressions of Li Yundong and Su Chan became more and more strange as they listened to the slogans, "Well, I may be a little busy in the next 2 days. I won't forget what I owe everyone. After these 2 days I will definitely make it up to you." Chapter 721. Ding Nan killed Sun Qing in an instant. The cultivators on the scene could not react for a while, especially when Ding Nan did not take out her powerful magical weapon. She was even muttering her opponent's name in a low voice, so they thought that Ding Nan had used some amazing magic. You almost there, and after a short period of silence, the Taoist priests in gray robes roared angrily and each took out their own powerful magical weapons. The cultivators of the Jingyi school also did not want to be outdone and took out all kinds of powerful magical weapons. For a moment, the flames of war on Mount Longhu were about to start again. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were in the crowd, also found Ding Nan at this time. Deng Yu pulled her sister curiously, pointed at Ding Nan and said, "Sister, look, it seems to be Zhou Qin's follower. Her name is Ding Nan, isn't it?" Deng Jiao also widened her eyes and said curiously, "That seems to be the case. It's so strange. How did she become the leader of the Yin-Yang sect in Mount Wuhua?" Deng Yu was silent for a moment, then she sighed softly and said, "Sister, haven't we also become the sword souls of Mount Longhu?" For a moment, the two sisters looked at each other and sighed. At such a young age, many things remained the same, but the people had changed and great changes had occurred in their hearts. Zhang Ling, who was not far away from them, did not know what the sisters were thinking. She glared at the gray-robed cultivators in front of her and shouted sternly, "Yin Kong, no matter what, you are still a member of our Jingyi school. We are all of the same origin. Why are we fighting today?" A middle-aged Taoist named Yin Kong chanted his Taoist name and sneered, "It's very simple. It's because we feel that Hua no longer has any true Taoist techniques. Confucius once said, if you lose the propriety, you will seek the wild. Today we are going to spread the true Tao art back to China, lest this Tao art that has been passed down for 2,000 years be destroyed by you guys." Zhang Ling was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She said angrily, "Wow, the Japanese came before and now you guys are bringing a group of foreign devils to force us to abdicate. Good, very good. It seems that you really regard our Dragon Tiger Mountain as nothing." Yin Kong threw his head back and burst into laughter. He stroked his beard and said contemptuously, "It's because I saw you being bullied by a group of Japanese people and couldn't even fight back that I made up my mind. Now there was no true Dharma in China. True Dharma was abroad. Our country lacks faith and etiquette. Now is the time for us to repay them." Zhang Ling scolded angrily, "Bullsh*t. You guys have forgotten your ancestors. How dare you speak so arrogantly?" As the two of them argued, the cultivators on both sides also scolded them, especially the golden-haired and blue-eyed foreigners in gray Taoist robes. Many of them also spoke fluent Chinese and scolded the cultivators of the Jingyi school. However, they obviously didn't have as many tricks as these natives. They just kept saying things like bastards, idiots, dog sh*teen and so on. How could they be like Zhang Lufang and the others, who kept scolding them for a few minutes without repeating the same words? It was wonderful. In the distance, Li Yundong and Su Chan were dumbfounded when they saw the two sides scolding each other. Su Chan whispered to Li Yundong, "Yundong, what's going on?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said in a low voice, I think I understand a little. It seems that the overseas branch of the Jingyi school has come back to make trouble. It should be regarded as a branch of the Jingyi school coming back to force us to abdicate? Su Chan asked curiously, an overseas branch? I understand. It must be a cultivator who ran away during the 10 years of turmoil. At that time they were abroad. Now that they have become successful, they have come back to compete for the position of the leader of the Jingyi school? Li Yundong said with a strange expression, it shouldn't be to compete for the position of the leader, right? The position of the leader of the Jingyi school and the position of the Chuanjin school are both the focus of the state. Not everyone can be the leader if they want to. If anyone comes and fights with them and wins, they can become the leader. Wouldn't the world be in chaos? Su Chan also nodded. That makes sense. If the leader of the Jingyi school wanted to be stable, he had to be recognized by the current emperor. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to be the leader for long. While they were whispering to each other, Yin Kong suddenly shouted from below, Zhang Ling, you know very well that my master Zhang Tianfang is also a direct descendant of celestial master Zhang. Why can't he inherit the position of sect leader? You object so fiercely. Are you afraid that if my master becomes the leader, your power will fall from then on? Humph, you would rather see the decline of Taoism because you are nostalgic for the power in your hands. Don't you feel ashamed? Zhang Ling was so angry that her whole body trembled. You are presumptuous. How dare you speak to me like this? At this time, Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly. Well, you really came back to fight for the position of leader? Now there will be a good show to watch. The two sides will definitely fight to the death. Su Chan had never had a good impression of the Jingyi school. She laughed gloatingly and said, well, fight, hurry up and fight. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He flicked his finger on Su Chan's forehead and glared at her. Are you crazy? You just want to see the world in chaos. Su Chan covered her forehead and made a face at Li Yundong. She was about to refute, but Li Yundong covered her mouth and coaxed, Okay, stop talking. Let's watch the fun. Only then did the two of them look at the field again. She immediately had an idea. She raised her voice and said to Zhang Ling, Jinren Zhang, the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua will unswervingly support you. You are the righteous sect of our Taoist Hua family. These overseas wanderers don't want to return to their country to serve. Instead, they have wild ambitions and want to come back to plot the family business of their ancestors. They are really worse than pigs and dogs. When the people of the Jingyi school heard this, they were all overjoyed. The way they looked at the people of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua became much gentler and friendlier. The Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua was just a small sect in the cultivation world of the Taoist Hua family. There were not many cultivators in the sect, and there were only a few masters in history. Compared with them, the Jingyi school was a behemoth that needed to be looked up to. Usually when they met in Jianghu, none of the cultivators of the Jingyi school looked at them seriously. Now that they saw the eyes of the Jingyi school looking at them, all of them felt as if they had drunk sweet wine. They were intoxicated as if they were floating like immortals. Zhang Ling's eyes flickered as she looked at Ding Nan. She nodded and praised her secretly. Zheng Yuan is a sinister villain, but his disciple is sensible and righteous. Not bad. However, Zhou Ping seemed to have seen through Ding Nan's wishful thinking at a glance. She snorted and said in a low voice, Humph, this guy suddenly took over the position of leader of Zheng Yuan's sect so quickly. There must be something shameful going on. If you ask me, she's not in the right place. She wants to make friends with us and get our recognition. Zhang Ling glanced at her conspiracy theorist disciple and shook her head. Why do we care how she got the position of leader? As long as she doesn't do evil like Zheng Yuan, I don't care how she got it. Besides, she is the first cultivator from another sect who has expressed support for us. We have to accept such kindness. Otherwise, will anyone still support our Jingyi school in the future? As she said this, she stepped forward, bowed, and said in a clear voice, I haven't asked for your name yet. Ding Nan's face lit up with joy and her eyes lit up. She didn't dare to be arrogant anymore. She jumped down from the high platform gracefully and returned the salute to Zhang Ling. I'm Ding Nan, the leader of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua. Zhang Ling smiled slightly and said, It turns out that the leader of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua has come to visit us. Sorry for not going out to meet you. Ding Nan was overjoyed. She knew that after Zhang Ling's words, she had been recognized by the Jingyi school as the leader of the sect. Even if others wanted to question her, they would have to think twice. Since the Jingyi school has admitted it, why wouldn't we? The two sides greeted each other, and the Taoist priests in gray robes were all furious. A tall Taoist priest pointed at Ding Nan and shouted angrily, "Who are you? Where did you come from? How dare you interrupt here?" Ding Nan wanted to kill someone here to establish her prestige, but her expression remained unchanged. She turned around with a smile and asked in a reserved and polite manner, "I haven't asked for your name yet, Jinren." The tall Taoist priest spat and said, "Bah, what name? I'm so jealous. My name is Yin Tian. What do you want? Do you want to fight with me?" Ding Nan smiled and lowered her head, a sharp light flashing in her eyes. She took advantage of the gesture of cupping her hands, touched the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade hidden in her sleeve with her finger, and whispered the other party's name. Suddenly, a few ferocious spirits rushed out of Ding Nan's body again, and in the blink of an eye, they rushed in front of Yin Tian. Yin Tian had seen Ding Nan's killing methods before, so he had been hiding in the dark. When he suddenly saw these spirits rushing over, he was shocked. He immediately shouted and stuck a talisman in front of him. Just as he was about to recite a spell, he suddenly felt his feet go numb. It turned out that Ding Nan had instructed the threaded hairpin of soul traversing the ground to sneak up behind Yin Tian and suddenly stab the Yongquan point in his feet from underground. Yin Tian roared and his mind suddenly trembled. He felt that the threaded hairpin of soul traversing jade was madly sucking his Jinqi underground. He wanted to resist, but the spirits of the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade had already rushed in front of him, roaring and dragging his soul out. Although Yin Tian himself was also a Jinshin master, the threaded hairpin of soul-traversing jade was a rare powerful magical weapon with the effect of breaking through defense. Moreover, after absorbing the Jinqi of Gu Feng and Yi Yu of the Fox Zen school, as well as Jing Yuan, the leader of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua, his spiritual energy had also become very powerful. In addition, with the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in front of him to lure the enemy, all of Yin Tian's Jinqi was used to defend the front. Therefore, the threaded hairpin of soul-traversing jade's sneak attack was successful, causing a Jinshin master to be killed in an instant. This time, even Li Yundong, a great master with rich experience in fighting, was shocked. He couldn't help but exclaim, "This Ding Nan is really shameless and insidious. This is too insidious and too difficult to defend against. Even I, if I'm caught off guard, I'm afraid I'll fall for it." Although the Jinshin of cultivators was powerful, not all of their bodies were protected by it, especially the gushing spring at the soles of people's feet. This was a place that very few people would use the power of Jinshin to protect. Even if someone wanted to protect it, it would be much weaker than other places. Ding Nan had taken advantage of this mentality of the other party and successfully launched a sneak attack, killing the cultivator who had spoken rudely to her in front of everyone. At this time, when everyone saw that Yin Tian had been sucked dry in the blink of an eye, they all burst into an uproar. The cultivator in the gray Taoist robe looked at Ding Nan in horror, and for a moment, many people were so frightened by her that they took a step back. However, because Su Chan had been entangled with the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade several times, she suddenly said to Li Yundong, "Yundong, this seems to be the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade." Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes lit up. "Yes, now that you mention it, it must be Zheng Yuan's powerful magical weapon that has fallen into Ding Nan's hands." The two of them could see that the cultivator in the gray Taoist robe was also sharp-eyed and had seen some clues. Yin Kong whispered a few words to a foreign Taoist priest with golden hair and blue eyes beside him. The foreigner looked at Ding Nan with some fear, but then Yin Kong patted him on the shoulder. Only then did he swallow hard, walk up to the arena, and say loudly in a strange Chinese accent, Do you dare to fight me one-on-one?" When Ding Nan saw that a foreigner had come up to challenge her, she immediately burst out laughing. The disciples of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua also roared with laughter. Song Guohua even shouted at the top of his lungs, "Leader of Mount Wuhua, I am so powerful that I am the only one in the world." Ding Nan had defeated two people in a row, especially one who was a powerful Jinshin master. The Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in her sleeve had swallowed the soul of this Jinshin master, and her spiritual energy had soared. Her self-confidence had swelled unprecedentedly. She pointed at the foreigner and said loudly, "Tell me your name. I don't kill nameless people." The foreigner swallowed hard and stammered, "My name is Adriano Chevalier, Adolphus Branné, David Frederick Hamburg, John Martin Ned, Paul Rodenfeld, Schalman, Thomas Victor, William and Skirches, Zeus Wolf, Demat Sendernier, Rome Hanks Schilds." At first, Ding Nan listened with a smile on her face, but the more she listened, the more stunned she became. When she heard the foreigner mention Hank Schill, she couldn't help but shout, "Why is your name so long?" The foreigner smiled and said seriously, this is just my surname. I haven't said my name yet. Ding Nan almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Her face was dull and the corners of her eyes couldn't help twitching. She stared blankly at the foreigner who was stammering her name and couldn't say anything for a while. When the cultivators of the various sects heard the foreigner say their names for more than a minute, they all looked at him dumbfounded and speechless. Ding Nan had a splitting headache and was sweating profusely. She glared at the foreigner angrily and thought to herself, could it be that they found out that I was using the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade and deliberately sent a guy with such a long name to deal with me? The Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade was indeed a powerful magical weapon that was once known to be invincible in the world. In particular, it could be upgraded infinitely and was extremely difficult to guard against. However, it had a major shortcoming, which was that the user had to know the other party's name and use the other party's name to lock onto the other party before it could be used against the enemy. Otherwise, this magical weapon was no different from ordinary jade. Ding Nan glared at the foreigner angrily and shouted, "Are you messing with me? How could a person's name be so long?" The foreigner still smiled and said, "I was born in southern Sweden. When I was 5 years old, my parents hadn't given me a name yet. This violated the Swedish surname law, so they were fined 5,000 kronor. My parents were so angry that they gave me such a long name. It's really a little hard to remember, isn't it?" Ding Nan was so angry that she gritted her teeth and said angrily, "Do you dare to repeat your name again?" The foreigner was indeed honest. He honestly repeated his surname again. This time he was much more fluent and quickly said his name. Ding Nan listened attentively to his name and wanted to remember it, but halfway through she felt dizzy and had a headache. How could she remember the rest of the name? When the foreigner finished, Ding Nan stood motionless and did not speak for a long time. After a long time, the corner of her mouth twitched, and her expression was dull. She glared at the foreigner with extremely depressed eyes, snorted angrily and turned to leave. At this time, Li Yundong, who was on the top of the mountain, had already laughed so hard that he almost fell off the mountain. As he wiped his tears, he burst into laughter and said, "Oh, Ding Nan must be crying in her heart. Damn it, why did you give me such a long name? Are you kidding me?" She fell into Li Yundong's arms, covered her stomach and giggled. "I've cultivated for 10 years to reach the Jinshin phase, but it's not as long as someone else's name." Well, the former Fox's Nest Group 9 was disbanded by a dear book friend. Now it's reopened. If you want to join, hurry up, 5890697. Chapter 722. The situation on the field had obviously surprised everyone. Not everyone could see Ding Nan's depression and strangeness, but in the eyes of those who were observant, it was obvious that Ding Nan was right. Yusun, Song Guohua and the other disciples of Mount Wuhua, who had been shouting slogans loudly, were also stunned. The words "sect leader of Mount Wuhua is so powerful" came to an abrupt halt. Song Guohua stared blankly at Ding Nan, who had returned. He wanted to cheer for her, but judging from the situation in front of him, it didn't seem that Ding Nan had won the fight, did it? But why did his sect leader come back on his own without even fighting? Yes, he couldn't use the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade, but there must be other powerful magical weapons, right? Could it be that even if he used these powerful magical weapons, he still couldn't defeat this foreign devil? This foreign devil was not powerful, and he could also defeat him. Song Guohua asked tentatively, "Palm." As soon as he said a word, Ding Nan glared at him angrily and shouted in a low voice, "Shut up, don't ask anything." Song Guohua immediately shut his mouth obediently. He looked back at Alba, who was trying hard to hold back her laughter, and suddenly said in a low voice, "Hey, why do you foreigners have such long names? Your name is also so long?" Alba couldn't help but burst out laughing, but as soon as she laughed, she saw Ding Nan glaring at her angrily. She was startled and quickly pulled a long face, looking as if she had suffered a great deal of hatred. She said seriously, "Master, my name is very short." As soon as she said this, some of the other members of the Yinyang sect reacted and secretly laughed. Ding Nan was furious. "Shut up, all of you." When Zheng Yuan had just died, Ding Nan had used cruel means to kill Zheng Yuan's hardcore followers of the Yinyang faction. After a bloody massacre, she had naturally established a lot of prestige. At this time she had killed 2 people in a second, which had doubled her prestige. Her shout immediately scared the others into silence, for fear of provoking their sect leader. When the foreigner with the long name saw Ding Nan coming down from the field, he was still a little stunned. He looked around blankly, then pointed to himself in disbelief. I seem to have won? After saying that, he danced with joy. Haha, I won. He turned his head to Yin Kong and said happily, Master, I won. I actually won. This seems to be called taking the opponent's illness without fighting? The corner of Yin Kong's eyes couldn't help but twitch when he saw him scratching his ears and cheeks impatiently. He shouted in a low voice, Idiot, this is the art of subduing the enemy without fighting. Come back quickly, don't embarrass yourself there. The foreigner replied with an oath and obediently returned to the crowd. However, as soon as he stood still, he was overjoyed and started to celebrate with his fellow disciples. Almost there, Yin Kong seemed to be used to these foreigners' behavior. He glanced at Ding Nan coldly, snorted, and said in a cold voice, Jinren Ding, don't you want to stand up for me? Why did you enter the field? Ding Nan smiled slightly but didn't speak. She just glanced at Song Guohua. Song Guohua reacted very quickly and immediately understood. He said loudly, That's not right. What's the seniority of our leader? What's the seniority of your foreign disciple? Isn't it disgraceful for my master to compete with him? His words were opportunistic, but they were reasonable. Ding Nan couldn't help but feel very satisfied when she heard this. But what made her even happier was that now that she was the leader, she no longer had to act according to others' eyes. Unlike before, she had to pay attention to Zhou Qin's or Zheng Yuan's expressions or eyes all the time. As long as there was the slightest mistake, she had to stand up and speak for them as a shield. Now, as long as she gave a wink, someone would stand up and speak for her obediently. She was so happy. Ding Nan was now like a drug addict who couldn't stop. It was absolutely impossible for her to give up the little power in her hands and her cultivation. She had already been involved in the big whirlpool of the cultivation world, and she was getting deeper and deeper. Of course, others didn't know what she was thinking, but Li Yundong, who was watching from afar, felt a little emotional. After laughing for a while, he looked at the woman who had once ridiculed him in the past and had once confided in him like a young girl in love. For a moment he felt a lot of emotions. Su Chan, who was standing to one side, was still smiling heartlessly. She giggled and said, Yundong, don't you think Ding Nan is a little stupid? If the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is useless, she still has other powerful magical weapons. Even if she doesn't, she can probably defeat this foreign devil with magic, right? This foreign devil seems to only be in the Zhuji phase. Li Yundong shook his head with a smile and patted the girl's head. On the contrary, Ding Nan is not stupid. She is very smart. In my opinion, her position as the leader of the sect is a little strange, so deep in her heart, she is eager to be recognized by others. Otherwise, she would definitely not get involved in this mess. Moreover, she has already achieved her goal of killing people to establish her prestige. In the future, if anyone in the cultivation world wants to make trouble for her, they will have to think twice. It's just the right time to stop now. Su Chan was not a fool, so she understood immediately. Her eyes lit up. Yes. Even if she can kill this foreigner, it won't do her any more good. It's better to stop while she's ahead. However, now these cultivators of the Jingyi school should have seen through her trump card. I'm afraid it will be difficult for her to sneak attack again. Li Yundong chuckled and said, although the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is powerful, as long as I'm not caught off guard, it's not impossible to guard against it. But if this powerful magical weapon is used together with the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, it's a little powerful. Moreover, if I'm not mistaken, Ding Nan should still have the immortal pen in her hand. Her current cultivation is not very high, but with these 3 magic treasures in hand, it's really a little scary. If used properly, even if I'm not injured, I will have to temporarily avoid it. Su Chan frowned and sighed softly. I hope that Ding Nan will not go against us in the future. Otherwise, the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade will be too difficult to guard against. But, Yundong, this Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is so powerful. How did the cultivator who held this powerful magical weapon be defeated? Li Yundong laughed and said, You asked the right person. When I was in the spirit space, I once read Cultivation Chronicles. It said that the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade had appeared in the world twice. The first time was during the reign of Emperor Huizong of the Song dynasty. A cultivator named Jinren Shantian used this vicious powerful magical weapon. At that time, this cultivator relied on this powerful magical weapon to run amok on the land of Jiangxi. At that time, famous cultivators almost avoided him when they saw him. Even Zhang Tianshi was no exception. But later, Jingyi school came up with a solution. They chose the strongest but least famous disciple of the younger generation to go down the mountain to find trouble with Jinren Shantian. At that time, when Jinren Shantian was bullying men and women, he suddenly met this nameless Jingyi disciple and started fighting. Li Yundong said with a strange smile, "It's a pity that Jinren Shantian, who dominated the world, was still trying to find out the other party's name when he was about to be killed by this Jingyi disciple." When Su Chan heard this, she couldn't help but laugh. This guy is so stupid. If he can't get the other party's name, he will use other methods to fight with him. However, Li Yundong shook his head and smiled. When you have a powerful magical weapon in your hand, you will become overly dependent on it. You always want to use your strongest point to defeat your opponent, but you ignore other things. Speaking of which, it's not a good thing to rely too much on powerful magical weapons. Ding Nan looks tyrannical and domineering now, but if her cultivation doesn't keep up, she will be no different from Ise Chuyun. If she meets a top master, she will definitely lose. Su Chan blinked and asked, "What about the second guy who held the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade? How was he defeated?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "The second one was in the Jiajing period of the Ming dynasty. A cultivator named He Yetong refined the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade again. At the beginning, Jinren he was much more cautious and low-key than Shantian. He never fought with people he didn't know. It wasn't until the powerful magical weapon in his hand and he knew almost all the names of the masters in the cultivation world that he began to kill. He even thought of using the emperor to control the princes. This angered the Son of Heaven. Emperor Jiajing flew into a rage and mobilized 20,000 imperial guards and 300 cultivators to gang up on him. They crushed him to pieces." Su Chan opened her mouth slightly and said tongue-tied, "Ah? So miserable?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Of course. No matter how powerful the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is, it's still a powerful magical weapon for one-on-one combat. There were so many names on the field. Could you read them all? Even if you could, it would be like chanting a spell. The others would have killed you long ago. In fact, in that battle, Jinren He, who was almost invincible in one-on-one combat, only had time to kill 2 cultivators before he was blasted into powder by countless powerful magical weapons and magic formations." As he spoke, Li Yundong sighed with emotion. "Speaking of which, this Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is not a good thing. Its murderous aura is too strong and it's an ominous thing. I'm afraid that Ding Nan holding it will be a disaster rather than a blessing." Su Chan blinked and looked at Li Yundong, her face full of admiration. "Yundong, you really know a lot. I've never heard Master talk about this before." Li Yundong rubbed the little girl's head dotingly and said with a smile, "As the emperor, he naturally has to prohibit these things from being spread among the people. Even if there are records and books, they have to be banned and destroyed. Since ancient times, heroes have used martial arts to violate the ban. Those who practice martial arts have already been very feared by the emperor, let alone these cultivators. Those cultivation sects are large and have many conflicts with each other, so they naturally don't dare to rebel at will. However, lone heroes like He Yetong and Shantian are very unscrupulous. If these things are spread around, I'm afraid that there will be villains with bad intentions everywhere who will join the church to learn the art of dragon slaying." Su Chan suddenly understood, but she quickly asked with a smile, "By the way, Yundong, if you used this powerful magical weapon just now with your memory, can you remember such a long name that the foreigner recited?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Since ancient times, there has only been a saying that people have a photographic memory. How can there be such a thing as an unforgettable ear? Even if there is, it is only amazing lyrics and poems. It takes a full minute to recite a name that has no logical connection with each other. Not to mention me, even the Emperor of Heaven will have a headache after hearing his name." Su Chan giggled. "There are also times when you can't do it?" Li Yundong's face darkened. "Are you itching for a fart? How can you say that your man can't do it? When I recover, you will know whether I can do it or not." Su Chan giggled and said, "You are always King annoying. You might as well take a Russian name and call it Subuksky. Such a long name. How good is it? It can also prevent Ding Nan from using the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade to hook your soul." Li Yundong's face was serious as he said, "Then you might as well take a name too. Call it, I won't feel comfortable without a spanking. What do you think?" After that, the two of them looked at each other and laughed. Chapter 723. The two of them laughed for a while, but the situation outside the field changed again. Seeing that Ding Nan had tactfully retreated, Yin Kong didn't want to continue to entangle with her. Although he was not willing to let Ding Nan kill two of his fellow disciples in seconds, he had priorities. Although he hated this beautiful woman in his heart, what was more important at the moment was the important matter of the Jingyi school. They had prepared for a long time for today's mountaineering. Although they had only come to test the waters, when they heard the news that the Japanese cultivation world was coming to make trouble and that the Jingyi school had lost face, Yin Kong was even more overjoyed. He believed that today was the weakest time of the Jingyi school, so he made up his mind to take charge and force them to abdicate. Even if this matter failed, he could find out the details of the other party. If he succeeded, it would definitely be a great contribution. After the leader ascended in the future, would the position fall into the hands of others? Because of this, Ding Nan was only a trouble for Yin Kong, while the disciples of the Jingyi school, who claimed to be the authentic Xianmen, were the real trouble. Although Ding Nan's magic treasures and trump cards had been seen through by him, it would take a lot of energy to deal with her in a short time. Moreover, who knew if she had other powerful magical weapons? In the cultivation world, even if it was a Jinshin master, if he did not know the opponent's magic treasure or details, he would suddenly be caught off guard by the opponent's magic treasure, and even his body and soul would be destroyed. Over the past thousands of years, there had been as many cases as the hairs on an ox. When Li Yundong had suddenly encountered the immortal tying rope, because he didn't know the characteristics of this powerful magical weapon, he had reached out his hand rashly. As a result, he had been tightly tied up. At that time, Li Yundong was a young boy and didn't know this, but Yin Kong was a great cultivator who had cultivated for decades. Naturally, it was impossible for him not to know this. There was a saying in the martial arts world, the older a person is, the less courageous he is. This saying was also applicable in the world of cultivation. However, in the world of martial arts and cultivation, this kind of courage did not mean that they were timid. Instead, it meant that they would be more cautious and more cautious. Years of living and experience had long smoothed out their sharpness, making them even more cautious, in case they failed miserably in an easy task. What really made Yin Kong wary were the two fierce men of the Jingyi school, sect master Zhang Tianshi and the former head of the Linggong sect, Wang Yuanshan. Although it was rumored that Wang Yuanshan had ascended 10 years ago, only celestial master Zhang was left. However, a lightning tribulation master was a lightning tribulation master after all. He could transcend the lightning tribulation at any time and become an immortal. It was currently winter, and if spring came, celestial master Zhang would have transcended the 9 lightning tribulations and become a mortal immortal. At that time, it would be extremely difficult to deal with him. Almost there, it was precisely because of this thought that Yin Kong decisively stopped looking for trouble with Ding Nan. He just said a few words to save face. Humph, Jinrending, you really have a good trick. We, the Shantian sect of Jingyi school, will remember this. After that, he turned his head and pointed his spear at the Jingyi school again. Yin Kong sneered and said, Jinrenzhang, look. How weak are you now? Don't you feel ashamed that you even need outsiders to help you with your internal affairs? Zhang Ling was domineering and arrogant, so she naturally refused to admit defeat. She sneered and said, anyone with a discerning eye can tell who is right and who is wrong at a glance. This fellow cultivator can't stand your behavior of forgetting your ancestors, so he helped you out of righteousness. You can control the mouths of your disciples, but can you control the mouths of all the cultivators in the world? Yin Kong raised his head and laughed. You're really eloquent. Good. It's a pity that we cultivators practice Dharma, Qi, flesh and Taoist magic arts, not our mouths. No matter how eloquent you are, it's useless if you can't beat us in the end. Zhang Ling raised her eyebrows and sneered. Oh? You finally revealed your fox's tail? You want to fight? Well, how can we fight? We'll keep you company. Yin Kong sneered, pointed to his disciples and shouted, disciples of the Shantian sect, listen up. Although he had brought a lot of foreigners with him this time, only a few of them had received the true teachings. Most of them were sent to make up the numbers. The main force was still the black-headed, yellow-skinned Chinese cultivators. As soon as Yin Kong shouted, dozens of Chinese disciples jumped out, holding long swords in their hands, and quickly set up a large formation. Yin Kong pointed to the field and said proudly, if any one of you can break this Shantian formation, we'll leave immediately. What do you think? Zhang Ling glanced around and saw that the dozens of Chinese disciples had set up a strange sword formation. In particular, there were 2 golden-eyed foreigners at the center of the formation. She sneered in her heart and was about to step forward when Zhang Kongyun grabbed her arm and whispered, Shiji, this formation is a little strange. Don't be careless. Since the other party dared to come, they must be fearless. Let me do it. Zhang Ling immediately shook her head and said, No, Shiji, you've just been injured. You can't fight with others now, or there will be endless trouble in the future. However, Zhang Kongyun said anxiously, Shiji, if I don't do it, who else can? Zhang Ling was silent for a while. She looked around and saw that although there were many disciples of the Jingyi school, there were 500 or 600 of them. However, many of these people were masters at the top phase of Yang spirit, which was similar to her own cultivation. They were only one step away from the Jinshin. As cultivators who had cultivated for decades, as long as they had a little more time, they might have more Jinshin. Soon. Once a cultivator reached the Jinshin phase, they would realize a qualitative change and completely enter a new world. This was the case for the Jingyi school at the moment. There was an obvious bottleneck and vacuum in the sect's strength. After Wang Yuanshan, who was known as the #1 in the world, betrayed the sect, the strength of the Jingyi school suffered an unprecedented blow. Later, Zhang Tianshi had to go into seclusion. On the one hand, he had to work hard to improve his strength, and on the other hand, he had to prevent others from challenging him and revealing his true strength. A top master was not terrible. What was terrible was that others did not know how strong he was. Zhang Tianshi was obviously well versed in this psychological tactic. He had been in seclusion for 10 years, so no one knew what kind of realm he had reached. Thus, they did not dare to easily make a move against the behemoth of the Jingyi school. At this time, in terms of the number of masters at the top phase of Yang spirit in the Jingyi school, there were probably 300 or 400 cultivators present. They were definitely the best in the world. In time, 1 in 10 of these masters would transform into Jinshin masters, and the Jingyi school would immediately become an extremely terrifying cultivation sect. But now, among these masters at the Yang spirit phase, the one who could fight the best was herself. The Jinshin phase was even more lacking, and only Zhang Kongyun was left. Zhang Ling couldn't help but sigh. Time waits for no man. These traitors didn't come earlier or later, but chose to come at this time. Their sinister intentions are truly infuriating. On the side of the Jingyi school, there was a sense of pain and entanglement. However, Su Chan, who was in the distance, said to Li Yundong in a low voice, Yundong, they're going to fight. Do you think we should help them? Li Yundong snapped his fingers and flicked her on the forehead. Help. Oh. Do you want to help with your life? Which side do you want to help? This is their internal affairs. Why should we get involved? Watch the show, watch the show. Su Chan covered her forehead and pouted. I was just saying. Why do you have to get physical? Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He held the little girl in his arms and began to get physical. The two of them flirted with each other while watching the show. Especially at this time, the two sides were at each other's throats. The situation was so tense that it was suffocating. It was like watching a movie in the cinema. If there was a bucket of popcorn at this time, it would be perfect. After playing with Li Yundong for a while, Su Chan obediently nestled in his arms and carefully looked at the sword formation. She found that although the formation of the Big Dipper and the 7 stars of the Southern Dipper could be vaguely seen, there were 3 more places where the sword chi was soaring into the sky. The killing intent was extremely strong. Even from a distance, she could feel a sharp chi coming at her, causing her skin to sting slightly. She said curiously, Yundong, this sword formation is so strange. It seems to be very scary. Li Yunyang was shocked by the sword chi of the sword formation, and all his hair stood on end. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at it. Then he pointed at the 3 formation eyes with the heaviest sword chi in the sword formation and said, This sword formation is in the form of Ziwei Do, and the 3 formation eyes are filled with murderous intent. If I'm not wrong, this should be the 7 killing star, the destruction star, and the greedy wolf star of the 3 killing stars. Once these 3 formation eyes are activated by the magic formation, they will immediately form a terrifying killing wolf destruction formation that will not stop until one of them dies. Su Chan naturally knew that the words killing wolf destruction formation represented an irreversible destructive force between heaven and earth. Her face suddenly changed in horror. So powerful. Who can break this formation? Yundong, can you break it? Li Yundong's face gradually became serious, and he couldn't help thinking, if it were me, how could I break this Shantian formation? In this formation, if any cultivator fought with me one-on-one, they would just be sending themselves to death. I'm afraid that no one can fight with me for more than 3 rounds. However, the great mysterious heaven formation that these dozens of people had formed was not just a combination of the strength of dozens of people, but a terrifying geometric increase. The power of this formation was based on the cultivators in the formation eyes. Even if everyone in the formation eyes was a yang spirit master, 3 of them together was a basic addition, which was 3. However, with each addition the power would be multiplied by 2 on the basis of these 2 people, which was 6. Then, another person would be multiplied by 2 again, which was 12. In this way, when the strength of dozens of people was repeatedly superimposed, it was simply unimaginable how powerful it was. Li Yundong observed it carefully for a while and felt that this formation was almost perfect and flawless. No matter where he attacked, it would attract a fierce and terrifying counterattack from the other side. Dozens of times the strength would come roaring like a landslide. It was really not something that a single person could resist. The more Li Yundong looked at it, the more frightened he became. Inadvertently he felt cold sweat running down his back. He thought to himself, no wonder it said that there are powerful magical weapons above magic, and there are magic formations above powerful magical weapons. After a series of fierce battles, Li Yundong had broken the Thunder Retribution with the power of Jinshin and defeated the Japanese cultivation world by himself. Even if he was not very proud, he still had some thoughts of looking down on the world. But now that Li Yundong suddenly saw this terrifying Shantian formation, his pride immediately disappeared, and he didn't dare to look down on the heroes of the world anymore. He was shocked and thought to himself, how could this overseas force of the Jingyi school, which suddenly appeared out of nowhere, use such a powerful magic formation? How powerful is the Sanju formation of the Jingyi school, which is known as the end of heaven, end of earth, and end of man? He was secretly frightened as he watched from above. Zhang Kongyun, who was below the field, was naturally a person who knew what was good for him. The more he watched, the more serious his expression became. After watching for more than a minute, his forehead was covered with beads of sweat, and his lips were trembling slightly. Looking at Zhang Kongyun's appearance, Yin Kong couldn't help laughing wildly. What do you think? If you don't have the guts, just give up. Zhang Kongyun calmed down and gave Zhang Ling, who was beside him, a reassuring look. Then he took a deep breath and shouted, Wang Yuanshan, if you stand by and do nothing, Mount Longhu will be completely replaced. Do you really want to see this happen? His loud shout caused the expressions of many people from both the Jingyi school and the Shantian sect to suddenly change. Only a few people in the world knew that Wang Yuanshan was not dead. Most people only knew that Wang Yuanshan had betrayed the sect and then been captured by the Jingyi school. Not long after, he had ascended to heaven. But now they suddenly heard that Wang Yuanshan, who had been known as the best in the world 10 years ago, was still alive. This was like a shocking thunder in their ears. Wang Yuanshan is not dead? Yin Kong's face changed and he looked at Zhang Kongyun in surprise. But after looking around for a while and seeing no one appear, he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He sneered and said, You're not so scared that you've started to talk nonsense, are you? Zhang Kongyun didn't even look at him. He just said loudly, Wang Yuanshan, no matter what happened in the past, you used to be a member of our Jingyi school. You don't want to see our sect, which has been passed down for thousands of years, disappear, do you? Zhang Kongyun's voice was so loud that it spread far away. It shook the valley and echoed. For a moment, everyone was silent. They all looked around, searching for the figure of the former best in the world. But after searching for a while, they only saw green mountains and blue waters and the shadows of trees. Where could they find anyone else? Yin Kong waited for a while in fear, but he still didn't see Wang Yuanshan. He couldn't help laughing and said, It seems that you are really crazy. Do you still want to call back the soul of a man who has been dead for 10 years? As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a very magnetic middle-aged man sigh softly not far away from him and say, We were born of the same root. Why are you in such a hurry to kill each other? As soon as the voice sounded, everyone's eyes turned to the source. They saw a man of average stature standing there. He was handsome and had a wisp of beard on his chin, which made him look very elegant. He had his hands behind his back, and his clothes were fluttering in the wind, as if a gust of wind would blow him away. There was an indescribable elegance all over his body. For a moment, a thought suddenly flashed through almost everyone's mind. Is this the best in the world, Wang Yuanshan? Chapter 724. Although there was no first in martial arts and no second in martial arts, in the 5,000 years of history of the Chinese people, there were very few who dared to claim to be the best in the world and be recorded in the history books and recognized by the world. Soon even a great man like immortal Zhang Sanfeng, who had lived from the end of the southern Song dynasty to the beginning of the Ming dynasty, had reached the peak of cultivation and could be called a living immortal, had never been called the best in the world. Although he could be called a grandmaster, even a person like Zhang Sanfeng did not dare to be presumptuous when he came to Mount Longhu. In the same way, Celestial Master Zhang of Mount Longhu had also been defeated in fights. In the early Qing dynasty, Celestial Master Zhang traveled to the Shangyun Temple in Lianyungang on the surface of Jiangsu province. On a whim, he fought with the Taoist priest and was defeated. From this, it could be seen that there were many hidden talents in China. Even powerful people like Zhang Sanfeng and Celestial Master Zhang did not dare to claim to be the best in the world. But since the ancient times, there had always been one or two extraordinary geniuses who could captivate the hearts of all living beings with their earth-shattering talent. Since the founding of Xin, the closest master to be recognized as the world's best fighter was the famous The World's Best Fighter, Sun Lutang. Sun Lutang entered the path of cultivation through martial arts and eventually reached the peak of cultivation. His cultivation was admired and respected by the cultivation world. However, Sun Lutang became an immortal in 1929, and for nearly 80 years he was not recognized as the best in the world until Celestial Master Zhang of Jingyi School publicly admitted that Wang Yuanshan's cultivation was higher than his and that he was stronger than him in fights. Therefore Wang Yuanshan was recognized as the best in the world by the world. When Celestial Master Zhang promoted Wang Yuanshan, he wanted him to become famous. However, since ancient times, there was no first in martial arts and no second in martial arts. If he dared to claim to be the best in the world, there would definitely be many people who would come to challenge him. Wang Yuanshan did live up to expectations at the beginning and defeated the masters of various sections. However, when he was famous all over the world, he met his nemesis, Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang had also heard of Wang Yuanshan's reputation as the best in the world. She was not convinced and wanted to test him, but she was completely defeated and even lost her body and mind. As soon as the two of them met, Wang Yuanshan, the genius most favored by Zhang Tianshi of the Jingyi school, immediately rebelled and threw himself into the arms of the beauty. Then Zhang Tianshi flew into a rage and mobilized all the forces of the Jingyi school to capture Wang Yuanshan. It was also because of this battle that Wang Yuanshan single-handedly fought against many masters of the Jingyi school, which made him famous. In the past 10 years the world had thought that he was dead. Who could defeat a dead person? In the past 10 years, although many outstanding cultivators had emerged from various sects, there was no one like Wang Yuanshan, who was similar to a magical power. Almost there, because of this, not only did Wang Yuanshan's reputation as the world's #1 expert not weaken, but it became even more valuable in the eyes of the public. Li Yundong, who was at the top of the mountain, saw that as soon as Wang Yuanshan appeared, everyone was stunned. There was no one on the field who dared to take a deep breath. He couldn't help but feel shocked and emotional. Wang Yuanshan is really not dead. Su Chan's mouth was wide open, almost able to fit her small fist. Master called him just now. Why didn't he come out? Li Yundong was also very shocked. He felt as if he had seen a legendary figure. He sighed and said, "He must have his reasons, right?" Su Chan's heart skipped a beat and she immediately said, "No, I have to tell Master right away." Li Yundong quickly held her down and glared at her. "Are you crazy? If you go out at this time, won't you expose yourself?" Su Chan responded with an "oh" and sat down again with a resentful face. She looked at the field intently. She saw Wang Yuanshan standing in the eyes of the crowd. He really had a kind of unrestrained and otherworldly aura, which made people admire him at first glance. She couldn't help but sigh and say, "The world's #1 expert really deserves his reputation." As she spoke, she suddenly had an idea. She turned to Li Yundong and asked, "Yundong, why do people still say that Wang Yuanshan is the best in the world in the past 10 years? Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's very simple. It's because there has never been a master who can suppress everyone. After all, it's not enough to praise a dead person. If you're not convinced, well, let's first go to the 9th heaven and find Wang Yuanshan to fight. The most terrible thing is not a master who can beat you down at once because you know his details. One day you will surpass his realm. But this kind of person who doesn't show his face is different. You never know how strong he is. You are always speculating about his details. After a long time, your Taoist heart will be seriously affected by him. When the time comes, your subconscious will tell you that you can't beat him, because he is the world's #1 expert, and you have always been living in his shadow." Su Chan blinked her eyes and asked again, "If you fight with Wang Yuanshan, Who is stronger? Li Yundong thought for a while and said slowly, I don't know, but I guess it should be the current Wang Yuanshan. However, since he has appeared, his status as the world's #1 expert is no longer mysterious and terrifying. Sooner or later, someone will test his realm and bottom line. Moreover, as long as he is alive, he may be defeated. On the contrary, if he dies, it will really solidify his title as the world's #1 expert. No one can defeat a dead person. Su Chan suddenly smiled and said, I finally know why the leaders of the major sects love to cultivate in seclusion so much. It turns out to be this reason. Li Yundong smiled and said, Don't talk about it. Let's watch the show and see how powerful the world's #1 expert is. While the two of them were talking, the disciples of the Jingyi school couldn't help exclaiming for a moment. There was surprise and joy in their voices. No matter what, at such a critical moment, a legendary figure like Wang Yuanshan had suddenly appeared. He was really like a savior, which was shocking. On the contrary, the older generation of cultivators of the Shantian sect were secretly a little panicked, but the eyes of the younger generation lit up and they were eager to have a try, especially the two golden-eyed foreign disciples in the eye of the formation. They couldn't wait to immediately compete with Wang Yuanshan so that they could replace him. Even Ding Nan, who had just entered the cultivation world, had heard of Wang Yuanshan's name. She stared at Wang Yuanshan and pinched the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade with one hand. Her fingertips were a little white, and her palms were constantly sweating. She kept thinking about a question in her heart. What will happen if I call out Wang Yuanshan's name at this time? Will he die? As soon as this thought came to her mind, Ding Nan subconsciously denied it. Impossible, he is the world's #1 expert. He can't die like this. If he doesn't succeed, I will be miserable. I will definitely be killed by him. Ding Nan didn't realize that she had already lost before she even fought with Wang Yuanshan. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. There was nothing more obvious than this. There were many people who had the same idea as her, and Yin Kong was one of them. Ever since Wang Yuanshan appeared, he immediately stared at every part of Wang Yuanshan's body. His sharp eyes were like a radar, wanting to see through Wang Yuanshan from inside out. Even when Wang Yuanshan raised his hand and moved his foot, Yin Kong firmly remembered them and frantically searched for flaws. If Wang Yuanshan revealed even the slightest flaw, Yin Kong would immediately attack. If he could defeat Wang Yuanshan, then the title of the world's #1 expert would fall on his head. What a great honor it would be. But no matter how hard he looked, Wang Yuanshan didn't have any genuine qi attached to his body, and he couldn't see the power of Jinshin at all. It seemed that there were flaws everywhere. No matter where Wang Yuanshan was hit, Wang Yuanshan seemed to be dead without a doubt. But the more it was like this, the more Yin Kong didn't dare to make a move. He knew that the man standing in front of him was already known as the world's #1 expert 10 years ago. There was no reason for him to stay where he was after 10 years of closed-door training. As soon as Wang Yuanshan appeared, everyone wanted to challenge him, but no one could really make a move. When Li Yunyang saw this scene, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He suddenly remembered what the middle-aged man had said to him when he was in a coma. His eyes flashed as if he had understood something. He thought to himself, is this the highest realm of invincibility? Subduing the enemy without fighting? In comparison, my previous earth-shattering and life-or-death battle is inferior. But how can I cultivate to such a realm? Moreover, if Wang Yuanshan really fights, what will the scene be like? I'm really looking forward to it. While he was thinking, Yin Kong finally gave up the idea of making trouble for Wang Yuanshan. His eyes narrowed slightly as if Wang Yuanshan, who was standing in front of him, was a dazzling sun. He had to narrow his eyes to have the courage to look directly at him and talk to him. Wang Yuanshan, you didn't die? Well, you came at the right time. Our Shantian formation needs a world's #1 expert like you to show its power. As he said this, he pointed to the murderous sword formation on the field and sneered, Wang Yuanshan, do you dare to break into this sword formation? If you dare, I will admit that you are the world's #1 expert. If you don't dare, then give me this #1 expert as soon as possible. When the people of the Jingyi school heard this, they were all furious. Just as they were about to scold him, they were stopped by Zhang Ling, Zhang Kongyun, and the others. They all stared at Wang Yuanshan attentively, wanting to see how he would deal with it. However, Wang Yuanshan showed a trace of an embarrassed smile on his face. He looked at the sword formation and sighed softly. You have dozens of people against me? I'm old. It's not appropriate, is it? Hearing this, Yin Kong was stunned, and an embarrassed expression almost appeared on his face. He had never expected that Wang Yuanshan, who was known as the world's #1 expert, would be so cowardly and reasonable that he could say such a thing. Su Chan, who was looking forward to Wang Yuanshan's great power on the top of the mountain, was stunned for a moment. Then she burst out laughing. She giggled in Li Yundong's arms and said, "Yundong, this Wang Yuanshan is very interesting." Li Yundong flicked his finger on her forehead and said, "You have no respect for your elders. He is your grandmaster, okay?" Su Chan covered her forehead with her hand and made a face at Li Yundong. "What grandmaster? You're so annoying. You left my master alone for 10 years. Humph, I don't like such a grandmaster." Before Li Yundong could speak to her, he saw Yin Kong say unwillingly, "Wang Yuanshan, do you want to fight them one-on-one? They are all disciples of the younger generation. Don't you feel embarrassed?" Wang Yuanshan sighed again and said, "I do feel a little embarrassed. As the saying goes, respect the old and love the young. You have to respect me, an old guy, and I also have to love these little guys. However, we are both old guys. Why don't we have a fight?" Yin Kong was slightly annoyed and said, "Wang Yuanshan, don't talk nonsense. When cultivators cultivate to the highest realm, they fight as a group. Individual courage is not enough." Wang Yuanshan nodded gently and said, "What you said makes sense." Yin Kong was overjoyed and hurriedly said, "Then come and try our formation. As long as you dare to break in, even if you can hold on for a minute, we will consider it your win." However, Wang Yuanshan shook his head and said, No, I won't break in." Yin Kong narrowed his eyes and said, "Wang Yuanshan, is it possible that you don't have an undeserved reputation and don't dare to break in?" This sentence was very powerful. Cultivators valued their reputation the most. Many famous cultivators did not easily fight with others because they were afraid that once they made a mistake, they would ruin the reputation they had accumulated over the years. For a moment, everyone held their breath, waiting to see how Wang Yuanshan would deal with it. Even Li Yunyang thought to himself, "If it were me, I would probably draw my sword out of its sheath, wouldn't I?" However, Wang Yuanshan, who was in everyone's eyes, nodded honestly and said, "Well, I wouldn't dare." Yin Kong took a deep breath. He felt like his fist had hit cotton. All the words he had prepared were useless at this time. At this time he really wanted to raise his head and laugh, but the corners of his eyes were twitching so badly that he really couldn't laugh. Everyone was also shocked. "Is this Wang Yuanshan so cowardly? No way." Yin Kong laughed dryly. He pointed at Wang Yuanshan and said angrily, "I think you are not the best fighter in the world, but the best receiver in the world." Anyone who was a little fashionable could understand that this sentence was extremely insulting. As long as one still had balls in his crotch, he would immediately fly into a rage after hearing it. However, Wang Yuanshan just smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "I don't deserve it, I don't deserve it. Jianghu people appreciate me." It was as if Yin Kong was praising him. For a moment, everyone gasped and thought to themselves, "Oh my god, this Wang Yuanshan is really a coward." Seeing that he was not angry at all, could it be that Wang Yuanshan's nickname was the world's best taker back then, but later on someone misrepresented it as the world's best taker, and in the end it became the world's best taker? Sorry it's late. There will be another chapter in a while. Chapter 725. Everyone saw that Wang Yuanshan, who was said to have passed away, had reappeared and was actually so terrified in front of everyone. Zhang Lufeng, who had always admired Wang Yuanshan's name, couldn't help but shout at Wang Yuanshan anxiously, "Sect leader Wang, he's cursing you." Wang Yuanshan looked at the person who spoke in surprise. "Ah, is he scolding me? Aren't you praising me for being the best in the world?" Zhang Lufeng didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "You're the world's best receiver, not the world's best fighter. It's the bottom, not the hand." Wang Yuanshan had a look of realization. "Oh, so that's how it is. I thought he was speaking a dialect of some place, so the pronunciation was a little different. I've learned something new. Little martial nephew, thank you. As expected, one is never too old to learn. Sigh, after not coming out for 10 years, I really can't keep up with the times. Speaking of which, what did the world's most beloved mean? Are they synonyms? Fake characters?" When everyone saw what he did, they couldn't help but snicker secretly. Zhang Lufeng stared at Wang Yuanshan, dumbfounded. She seemed to have heard a high and mighty sacred thing in the depths of her heart being smashed to pieces. Wang Yuanshan and Zhang Kongyun had a very close personal relationship. Although Zhang Kongyun had personally led him into the trap, deep in Zhang Kongyun's heart, he admired and worshipped his best friend. In private he often told Zhang Lufang how great Wang Yuanshan was in the past. But at this time Zhang Liufang's eyes were wide open, and she muttered to herself, "No way, this is the world's #1 Wang Yuanshan? Master, are you sure this is Wang Yuanshan? Why do I feel like he's talking like a mother-in-law?" Zhang Kongyun did not know whether to laugh or cry. He tugged at his beard fiercely and his old face scrunched up. He cursed in a very low voice, "This bastard. Is he deliberately playing tricks on us?" Su Chan, who was on the cliff, also giggled and said, "So this is how the world's #1 expert comes to be? Was it a local dialect? So these past 10 years were all just rumors?" Li Yundong rolled his eyes. "Idiot. Was there such a thing as receiving 10 years ago? He's pretending to be confused. Can't you see that?" Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong. "Why can't I tell? He can make jokes but I can't? Besides, aren't you the kind of guy who likes to mess with people the most? You look a lot like him to me. No wonder my master told me privately that you are very similar to Wang Yuanshan. He could see his shadow in you." Li Yundong raised his head and laughed. He said arrogantly, "Bullshit, he is him and I am me. In the future it's hard to say who looks like who." Seeing that he was a little jealous and unhappy, she smiled and said, Yes, my master is the only one in the world. Even Wang Yuanshan has to stand aside. He's just a little stronger than you now. In the future you'll definitely be a little stronger than him, okay?" Li Yundong deliberately said with a straight face. "Humph, although my current cultivation is not as good as his, I'm much more handsome than him." Su Chan laughed and trembled. Yes, my master is the most handsome, so handsome." Li Yundong snorted and pinched the little girl's chubby cheeks lovingly. His eyes looked at the field again, only to see that Jinren Yin Kong of the Shintian sect was really shocked by Wang Yuanshan's cowardice. He stood where he was and looked at Wang Yuanshan dumbfoundedly, not knowing what to say for a moment. The disciples of his sect all lowered their heads and tried to hold back their laughter. How could they still be in the mood to set up the sword formation? The murderous Shintian formation had been completely destroyed. Soon Wang Yuanshan wanted to pretend to be stupid, but he couldn't force him to make a move, could he? Yin Kong knew that the magic formation of the Shintian sect was extremely powerful. Even if a golden immortal entered the magic formation, he would have to go in standing and come out lying down. No matter how powerful Wang Yuanshan was, once he entered the magic formation, he would be blasted into pieces. However, this magic formation also had the biggest drawback, that was, it couldn't be moved and could only be static defense. Wang Yuanshan obviously saw through this at a glance. He refused to enter the formation no matter what, thinking that Yin Kong wouldn't dare to do anything to him outside the formation. Even if a street gangster or a gangster saw this kind of rogue kung fu, they would have to sigh and retreat. Yin Kong's face turned purple. Obviously, he was a little confused by Wang Yuanshan's shocking cowardice. He stammered, "Wang Yuanshan, you are really..." Wang Yuanshan looked at Yin Kong with a smile and said, "Really what?" Yin Kong's face turned red and he roared, "You are really shameless. You are the shame of our generation of cultivators." Wang Yuanshan looked surprised and said, "It's strange. Dozens of you want to beat me up. Is it strange that I refuse? You have so many young people bullying an old man like me. Don't you think it's shameless? Why do you blame me for being shameless? What kind of logic is this?" Everyone couldn't help but laugh. Although they felt that Wang Yuanshan's words were reasonable, the disciples of Shintian sect could clearly see that although Wang Yuanshan's voice was that of a middle-aged man, his face was that of a man in his 30s. It was the perfect age to combine maturity and handsomeness. At first glance, the bystanders only felt that he was 100 times more handsome than a movie star. If he were to be described as an old man, they would never be able to compare him to them. Yin Kong was completely speechless by Wang Yuanshan. He had calculated everything, but he really hadn't expected that Wang Yuanshan would act like a hooligan and act shamelessly against him. For a moment Yin Kong was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He stood there, not knowing how to get out of the situation. Some of the disciples of the Jingyi school were laughing so hard that their intestines were about to break, but because of Wang Yuanshan's seniority, they didn't dare to laugh out loud. They just lowered their heads and their shoulders kept shaking. When the disciples of the Shintian sect saw their master lose his composure, they also wanted to laugh secretly, but they didn't dare to laugh in front of Yin Kong. They could only lower their heads and keep shaking their shoulders like the disciples of the Jingyi school. Li Yundong and Su Chan looked over and saw that both sides of the field were bowing their heads, as if there was a memorial service. All they needed was a bow, a second bow, and a third bow. The disciples of the Jingyi school didn't dare to laugh, but Su Chan didn't have this scruple. The little girl had already rolled around in Li Yundong's arms with laughter. She rubbed her stomach and said with a smile, "Oh, this world's top expert is too funny. I've never seen such a funny master. Is he also a great cultivator? How does he look like a great cultivator?" Li Yundong looked at Wang Yuanshan with flickering eyes. After a while, he suddenly exclaimed in a low voice, "Ah, I understand. I finally understand what the highest realm of cultivation is." Su Chan suddenly stopped laughing and looked at Li Yundong curiously. "Ah, what is the highest realm of cultivation? Is it the oneness of heaven and man?" Li Yundong's eyes lit up with surprise and he said, "The oneness of heaven and man is just a process and a means. But after the oneness of heaven and man, there is the infinite void realm, and the infinite void realm secretly shows the meaning of being born into the world. Chaner, do you know that there are 3 realms of cultivators?" Su Chan raised her head obediently and looked at Li Yundong's excited expression as he comprehended the truth of cultivation. She couldn't help but feel a little happy for him. She said very teasingly, "I don't know. Yundong, please teach me." Li Yundong smiled and said, "There are 3 realms of cultivators. The first is to see mountains as mountains and water as water. The second is to see mountains as mountains and water. The third is to see mountains as mountains and water as water." Su Chan's eyes also lit up. "Ah, I understand. The first realm you mentioned is the realm of entering the secular world, the second is the realm of being born into the secular world, and the third is the realm of re-entering the secular world?" Li Yundong laughed and rubbed the girl's long black hair hard. "Not bad, not bad. You're really my girl. You're so smart. Come over and kiss me." Su Chan giggled as she leaned over and planted a few kisses on Li Yundong's cheek. "It's because my master speaks in a way that's easy to understand. Unlike those Taoist classics which are full of obscure poems that give me a headache just looking at them." Li Yundong said, "Wang Yuanshan is in the 3rd realm. He sees mountains as mountains and water as water. This is also the realm of Taoism. Taoism follows nature, and all methods follow one's heart. The Buddhist Dharma says that there is no self, no human, no living beings, and no longevity. It means that everything is empty, and only the true Dharma follows one's heart. When cultivators cultivate to the highest realm, they will see through everything and see through everything. The only thing they have to follow is their own heart. As long as their heart moves, heaven and earth will move." Su Chan blinked her eyes. She seemed to understand, but at the same time she didn't quite understand. She said, "It sounds a little difficult to understand." Li Yundong laughed. "In fact, it's very simple. The highest realm of cultivation is to follow one's own heart. One's own heart is the true Dharma, and it is the only thing in the world that can be relied on and trusted." As he spoke, Li Yundong's face suddenly became serious and he said seriously, "In fact, the highest realm of cultivation can be simplified into one word. Su Chan, today I will tell you the secret of the highest realm of cultivation. You must not tell it to anyone." Su Chan rarely saw Li Yundong like this. She quickly got up from her master's arms and sat opposite him seriously. She said with a serious face, "Yes, I will not tell anyone." Li Yundong nodded and said solemnly, "The highest realm of cultivation is to follow one's own heart. In short, there are 2 key words: follow one's heart. Therefore, when these 2 words are combined, they can represent the highest realm of cultivation." Before Su Chan could react, she said seriously, "One's obedience, one's heart, put together." Suddenly her mouth opened wide and she was dumbfounded, dumbfounded, and dumbfounded. One's obedience, one's heart, put together, isn't that the word coward? The highest realm of cultivation is coward. Coward, coward? Yundong, you didn't make a mistake, did you? Su Chan stammered and didn't know what to say. But when she saw that although Li Yundong's face was serious, his stomach was slightly twitching, she suddenly understood. She threw herself into Li Yundong's arms and scolded him with a smile, "You're playing with me. You're so annoying." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He put his arms around the little girl's waist and said, "I'm not lying to you. This is indeed the highest realm of cultivation. Look at the leader of the Jingyi school. He hasn't shown up from the beginning to the end. There is a deep water and fire outside, but he just sits on the fishing platform. If this isn't cowardice, then what is?" Look at those cultivators who are being ordered around by the officials. Each of them can easily kill these officials, but they just admit defeat. What can you do to them? As the saying goes, if one man admits defeat, 10,000 people will be invincible. What a heroic statement. Su Chan said with a smile, "Bah, you talk a lot of nonsense. But, it seems that what you said makes a little sense." Li Yundong said with a smile, "It's more than a little sense. It's 2, 3, 4 or 5 points. Don't underestimate the matter of admitting defeat. It's a skill. Look at Wang Yuanshan's cowardice. No one can do anything to him. Don't you think he's the best in the world? Well, do you want to fight him one-on-one? But no one dares to do it. If you ask him to break through the magic formation by force, he will immediately admit defeat and insist that you want to beat him with numbers and bully the elderly. What can you do to him? Moreover, this wasn't a formal occasion, so even if he admitted defeat, he wouldn't get any benefits. This Wang Yuanshan is very shrewd. He's amazing, really amazing." Su Chan pursed her lips and said disapprovingly, "I hope he can defeat the other party in a fight. That would be interesting." Li Yundong shook his head with a smile. He looked at Wang Yuanshan with admiration and said, "No, Wang Yuanshan told me one thing with his own actions." Su Chan asked curiously, "What is it?" Li Yundong said, "This is that people should act according to their own strength." What is the Tao of nature? The Tao of nature is to act according to one's own strength. If one overestimates one's own strength, then one will be doomed to die. You only have the capacity to eat 2 bowls of rice, but you want to eat 20 bowls. If you don't die, who will? You obviously only have the strength of 100 kilograms, but you want to carry a burden of 500 kilograms. If you don't die, who will? Even if you cultivate to the golden immortal realm, you will still be invincible in the world. In the face of a powerful magic formation, even the most powerful golden immortal will shrink back. Su Chan blinked her eyes in understanding and looked at Wang Yuanshan. "I see, but can this make the people of the Shintian sect retreat? This is unlikely, isn't it?" As soon as she finished speaking, she saw Wang Yuanshan sigh softly and walk up to Yin Kong. He patted him on the shoulder like an old friend and said, "Jinren, we are all disciples of the Jingyi school. Why do you have to do this? Everything in this world can be discussed. Why don't you invite your leader to Mount Longhu some other day? We can all sit down and have a good talk. What do you think?" When Yin Kong saw Wang Yuanshan's hand coming for his shoulder, he wanted to dodge, but he felt that no matter how he dodged, Wang Yuanshan's palm would always land on his shoulder. It was as if an invisible hand had enveloped him, making him unable to move at all. His dull mind was taught a lesson by Wang Yuanshan. His face turned blue and red, and the corners of his eyes twitched for a long time. Then he gritted his teeth, turned his head and shouted at his disciples, "Let's go." This time the disciples of the Jingyi school all cheered. Su Chan also widened her eyes and said in surprise, "No way? You can retreat by admitting defeat? Isn't that too exaggerated?" Hey, have you followed your heart today? Chapter 726. Su Chan looked at Yin Kong in disbelief, as if she couldn't understand why he would retreat when Wang Yuanshan had admitted defeat. However, Li Yundong laughed as if all this was within his expectations. He said with a smile, "This man named Yin Kong is quite decisive. It's wise to give up decisively at this time." Su Chan asked curiously, "What do you mean?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "What else can we do if we don't give up? Can we still force Wang Yuanshan to enter the array? The strongest man in the world admitted defeat to you. If you think that he is really cowardly and doesn't have any real ability, then you are wrong. Anyway, it's already a huge gain to force Wang Yuanshan, who is said to be dead, to show up. Although we didn't test his true strength, we forced Wang Yuanshan to not dare to enter the array. This way he can explain himself when he goes back." Su Chan nodded and said, "I understand. It's the same as Ding Nan's previous idea of quitting while you're ahead." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Yes, that's right." The two of them muttered on the cliff. Seeing that Yin Kong was depressed by Wang Yuanshan, the disciples of the Shintian sect had no choice but to return to the crowd. Yin Kong glanced at Wang Yuanshan with resentment and secretly gnashed his teeth. His wishful thinking had been completely disrupted by this guy who had appeared out of nowhere. But as Li Yundong had said, he had not gained nothing. Anyway, this time it was just a visit to test the way. In other words, he had done a good job this time. Understanding this, Yin Kong decisively stopped pestering Wang Yuanshan. He snorted angrily, cupped his hands to Zhang Ling and said, "Jinren Zhang Ling, we want to worship our ancestors. Please lead the way." Zhang Ling also breathed a sigh of relief. Since the other party had proposed to publicly worship their ancestors, it meant that there would be no rebellion at the moment. Moreover, it was impossible for the other party not to know where the way was, but letting them lead the way could also be regarded as a disguised compromise. When a sect displayed enough strength, the other party would naturally be polite and follow the rules of etiquette. However, if Wang Yuanshan did not show himself, then they would first beat him into submission and then let him lead the way. That way, the nature of the situation would be completely different. No matter what, he had passed this hurdle. Zhang Ling knew very well that his sect leader was now in the most critical period of his closed-door training. Although he occasionally went out with his yang spirit to pay attention to the world's events, he would never come out at this time to intervene in these matters. Even if there was a fierce battle at the foot of the mountain, he would not come out because he knew that as long as he was still there, the Jingyi school would not fall. But if he appeared rashly and was not strong enough, once he was knocked down, it would be a terrible disaster. Sometimes, admitting cowardice was a kind of realm. A real man was flexible. A dragon could hide beneath the 9 earths, but it could also soar in the 9 heavens. At present, Zhang Ling could even count with her fingers that the Spring Festival would be coming in a few days. After the Spring Festival, it would officially be the beginning of spring. After the beginning of spring there would be rain. In the universe, thunder began with water. When the rain fell, all things were nourished and full of vitality. Then when the thunder fell, all things grew, snakes and insects moved, the chi of the earth rose and the weather fell. It was the best golden time to cross the thunder tribulation. Any great cultivator with a little experience knew that the golden time of the day was in the morning, and the golden time of the year was in the spring. The golden time of the day for cultivation was the few hours in the morning, and the best time of the year for cultivation was the beginning of the spring festival and the 2 solar terms after the spring equinox. After the spring festival it was the spring equinox, and after the spring equinox was the Qingming festival. There was a poem from ancient times that said, "During the Qingming festival, the rain fell, and the passers-by on the road were sad." It could be seen that during the Qingming festival, there was an excess of rain, and the air was extremely humid. Cultivators were most afraid of moisture entering their bodies. Crossing the thunder tribulation in this season was undoubtedly a very stupid and naive behavior. After the Qingming festival came the grain rain, and as the name suggested, the rain became heavier. After the grain rain came the beginning of summer. No cultivator in the world would be so bored as to wait until summer to cross the thunder tribulation. The reason was very simple. Although summer was the season with the most vitality, once the thunder was too powerful, the risk of crossing the thunder tribulation would multiply, and the rewards would not necessarily multiply. As for autumn and winter, only a fool would cross the thunder tribulation in these 2 seasons. Autumn was the season when all things withered and the vitality was weak. Crossing the thunder tribulation at this time would yield half the results with twice the effort. As for winter, there was no need to talk about it. There was no vitality at all, and even if one was struck by lightning, it would be for nothing. Therefore, at this time, the top golden cultivators in the world of cultivation had long set their eyes on the spring equinox and the spring festival. They were all rubbing their palms and preparing to cross the thunder tribulation. From their point of view, as long as they passed the thunder tribulation, their cultivation would greatly improve or even double. Even if they passed the 9 stages of thunder tribulation, they would directly leap into the realm of the 9th heaven of the fairy realm. Even if they were at least a human immortal. Once they became an immortal in the world, it would really be 9 transformations of carefree Dao fruit, 3,000 achievements becoming an immortal. Jindan Jade Slip, Clear Edict, Crane Riding Cloud Chariot to Paradise. If they did not have enough fun in the human world, they would continue to play. If one day they were tired of it, they could ascend to the 9 heavenly nights heaven at any time and go to the immortal world to watch the fun. From then on, they would no longer have anything to do with the human world. 4 inner disciples like Zhang Tianshi, who had started cultivating in their mother's womb, their only purpose of cultivation was to ascend to become an immortal and go to the immortal world. Therefore, in their eyes, this kind of power struggle between the Shantian sect and the Longhu sect was just a small matter, far less important than crossing the thunder tribulation. Therefore, if cultivators like them were preparing to cross the thunder tribulation, they would prepare in advance, ignoring the outside world and wholeheartedly focus on crossing the thunder tribulation. Only a rookie in the cultivation world like Li Yundong would run around and fight for his life without preparing for the thunder tribulation at all. Therefore Zhang Ling also knew that if Wang Yuanshan held a grudge this time and did not show himself, then they would be in deep trouble. Longhu Mountain might even have to change hands. Even if it was not easy to change hands, if Celestial Master Zhang was alarmed and delayed his lightning tribulation, then they would not be able to afford it. At this time, Zhang Ling saw that the other side had admitted defeat, so she quickly took advantage of the situation and walked down the mountain with Yin Kong without losing her manners. When she passed by Ding Nan, she looked at her with appreciation, bowed slightly and said, "Jinren Ding, I wonder if you are interested in going to our ancestral court to have a look?" Ding Nan was overjoyed when she heard this. She was a very utilitarian woman, always thinking about strengthening her strength and power. In her opinion, only by constantly growing stronger could she ensure that such a happy life would not leave her. Therefore she had come to Mount Longhu to show her face in front of the heroes of the world. She hadn't expected that after being delayed along the way, the Jingyi school would accidentally fall into her hands. Ding Nan nodded quickly. For a moment she didn't even care about being reserved and said with a smile, "The Tao of the world originates from the Righteous One. I want to pay my respects to the three pure emperors." Ding Nan's flattery made everyone present look proud for a moment. Even the disciples of the Shantian sect who had a grudge with Ding Nan looked at her a few more times, as if they felt that this woman looked much more pleasing to the eye at this time. When Su Chan, who was on the top of the mountain, heard Ding Nan's words, she couldn't help wrinkling her nose and saying, "Ding Nan, how can you flatter me like this? I can't stand it." However, Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "This is not flattery. The Tao of the world originates from the Righteous One." Although this sentence is too flattering, it also makes some sense. After all, the current Jingyi school has integrated many cultivation sects from ancient times to the present. Judging from the history of Chinese Taoism, there is no Taoist sect earlier than the Jingyi school. In terms of influence, the Jingyi school deserves this sentence. Su Chan asked curiously, "Really? I remember watching TV saying that the martial arts of the world originate from Shaolin, but I've never heard of the saying that the Tao of the world originates from the Righteous One." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Your master taught you everything you know. Your master hates the Jingyi school to death. How could he say such things to you? Besides, can you take it seriously on TV? The saying that the martial arts of the world originates from Shaolin is a real falsehood. This is a sentence made up by Jin Yong. Without Jin Yong and the movie Shaolin Temple, the Shaolin Temple would never have reached such a level and scale. In Jin Yong's view, Chinese martial arts are powerful in ancient times, and the more modern they are, the worse they are. But in fact, it is the opposite. The peak of our Chinese martial arts was at the end of the Qing dynasty and the beginning of the Republic of China. This was the peak of Chinese martial arts in this chaotic world that had not been seen in 1,000 years. There were Li Shuwen, the divine spear, Li Luaning, the divine fist, Gui Yunshin, who conquered the world with half-step bursting boxing, Dong Haichuan, the eunuch master, Qing Tinghua, the 8 diagrams master, and Li Tsuani, the great master of national martial arts who was invincible before the age of 70. Not to mention Sun Lutong, the world's first-class martial arts master, Shang Yunxiang, Xue Ding, and others who are as famous as Sun Lutong. What is the Shaolin Temple doing at this time? The Shaolin Temple of these bald donkeys has been burned down. Have you ever heard of any Shaolin Temple in modern times that has a famous martial monk? 100 years ago, the most famous martial monk of Buddhism was Master Haideng. Unfortunately, he has nothing to do with the Shaolin Temple. Su Chan clapped her hands and said angrily, "It turns out that TV is all lies. I won't watch it in the future." Li Yundong laughed. "You can't stand it?" Su Chan pulled a face at Li Yundong. "The TV cheated me of my feelings. I don't want it anymore. I don't want it anymore." Li Yundong laughed. He really loved Su Chan's naivety. If it had been anyone else, it would have been creepy and pretentious. But Su Chan had an indescribable innocence and charm. The combination of these two temperaments made Li Yundong so infatuated with her that he could not extricate himself. Li Yundong smiled and patted Su Chan's cheek. Okay. Remember what you said. If I find out that you're secretly watching TV when we get back, you'll be punished according to the family rules." Su Chan stuck out her tongue and suddenly felt a little regretful. She looked at Li Yundong timidly and said, Can't I watch it on the computer?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Just as he was about to speak to her, he saw that the disciples of the Shantian sect and the Jingyi school, who had been at daggers drawn, had all gone down the mountain. Ding Nan was also following behind the team. Her disciples were also tactful. At this time they finally stopped shouting the shameless slogan. However, Song Guohua was really a bit quick-witted. He made up a crooked poem on the spot and asked the disciples to shout loudly, "The Tao of the world originates from Jingyi, and the success of cultivation lies in Wuhua. The Great Way is everywhere and the Jinren of the world is one family." Although his poem wasn't very standard, the disciples of the two sects, young and old, all smiled when they heard it. They were very satisfied and the anger from before dissipated a lot. Ying Kong even started chatting with Zhang Ling with a smile. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to tell that the two sides had almost killed each other just now. Li Yundong looked at them, who seemed to be harmonious on the surface, but in fact were full of honeyed words and daggers. He shook his head secretly. Su Chan didn't notice this. She pulled Li Yundong's sleeve, pointed to the group of people and said curiously, "Ah, I think I see Hardadef." When Li Yundong had fought with the Japanese before, all his attention had been focused on his opponent, and there were thousands of people on the sidelines. How could he have noticed Hardadef hiding in the crowd? Even just now his attention was focused on Ding Nan, Wang Yuanshan and the others. Who would pay attention to the people on the sidelines? Hardadef? Li Yundong was stunned. Why is he here? Where is he? But at this time the group of people had already gone down the mountain and was far away. How could he see clearly who was hiding in the crowd in the woods? Su Chan hesitated for a moment and said, "I can't see him anymore. Maybe I was wrong?" But at that time his back looked quite similar. Li Yundong smiled and said, "I saw Alba. It seems that she is doing well with Ding Nan. Fortunately, Ding Nan still has some humanity and didn't do anything to her." Su Chan rolled her eyes and looked at the field again. Suddenly, she didn't know when there had been another person on the field. This person's dress was fluttering and she was long like a waterfall. There was a vermilion beauty mole between her eyebrows, and she had a small oval face. Her appearance was stunning. This beauty stood still and stared at Wang Yuanshan, who was on the field. Her eyes were full of hidden bitterness and infatuation, like a pool of autumn water. This person was none other than Ao Wushuang. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.